Rancher dares boy to face his fierce bull, but what happens next? The cruel laughter echoed across the ranch as Richard Coleman pointed his finger at the 11-year-old boy standing at the property's entrance. Tyler Johnson swallowed hard, feeling sweat trickle down his forehead as he watched the burly man approach with heavy steps that made the dry earth crack beneath his boots. "So you actually came, kid?" Richard spat on the ground, leaving a brown trail of saliva from the tobacco he chewed. "Thought you'd run away like your coward father." Tyler clenched his fists, anger burning in his chest. He couldn't let this man talk about his father that way, even though he knew Nathan Johnson had left town 3 months ago without explaining anything to anyone. His father's absence was an open wound in the boy's heart, but he wouldn't let Richard use it against him. "My dad's not a coward," Tyler replied firmly despite the trembling in his legs, "and I came to get what's rightfully ours." Richard let out a booming laugh that sent birds scattering from nearby trees. The rancher was known throughout Boulder Creek for his cruelty and the pleasure he took in humiliating the weak. His 500-acre property was the pride of the region, and he made sure everyone remembered he was the most powerful man around. "Rightfully yours?" Richard mocked, rubbing his protruding belly. "Your father owed me $15,000, boy, disappeared like a thief in the night, and left you and your mother in misery." The words hit Tyler like a punch to the gut. He knew the family's finances had been tight since his father vanished, but he never imagined such a large debt existed. His mother, Amanda, worked day and night as a seamstress just to put food on the table. Yet they could barely afford rent for their small house on the outskirts of town. "That can't be true," Tyler muttered, more to himself than to Richard. "Oh, it can't." The rancher pulled a yellowed paper from his shirt pocket and waved it in front of the boy's face. "Here's the signed document from your father. $15,000 borrowed 2 years ago with 3% monthly interest. Today, the debt's over 25 grand. Tyler reached for the paper, but Richard was quicker, tucking it back into his pocket. The boy felt the world spin around him. How could his family ever pay such an enormous sum? His mother barely made $600 a month when she had work. "But I've got an offer for you, kid," Richard continued, a malicious grin not reaching his small, cruel eyes. "If you can last 5 minutes in the pen with my black devil without running, I'll wipe out your father's debt." Tyler looked where Richard pointed and felt his blood run cold. Inside the large wooden pen, an enormous bull paced back and forth, snorting and stomping its hooves hard enough to make the ground tremble. The beast was pitch black, muscles rippling beneath its dark hide, with long, sharp horns gleaming under the midday sun. 5 minutes, Richard repeated, savoring each word. "You make it, your family's free. If not, well, you'll have to find a way to pay me. And I've got some ideas on how your mother can work for me." The insinuation in the rancher's voice filled Tyler with a fury he'd never felt before. He knew exactly what Richard was implying, and the thought of his mother being humiliated by that disgusting man was unbearable. "I'll do it," Tyler said, surprising even himself with the steadiness in his voice. Richard's eyes widened. Clearly, he hadn't expected the boy to take the challenge. He had made the offer just to amuse himself with the boy's desperation, but now he realized Tyler was serious. "Are you sure, kid?" Richard asked, quickly regaining his composure. "Black Devil has already hurt 3 grown men. One of them spent 2 months in the hospital." Tyler nodded, trying not to think about the stories he'd heard about the rancher's bull. Black Devil was famous throughout the region for his aggression and immense strength. Richard used him in bull riding competitions, where the animal had never been tamed for more than a few seconds. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, back to the story. "All right then," Richard clapped his hands, getting the attention of the ranch hands working in the nearby pens. "Come see this, everyone. Nathan's boy is going to try to tame Black Devil." Soon, a small crowd gathered around the main pen. Tyler recognized some faces among the ranch workers, men toughened by hard labor in the fields, now watching him with a mix of curiosity and pity. Among them was Frank Miller, a 50-year-old man who had worked for Richard for over 20 years and had always been a friend to the Johnson family. "Tyler, for heaven's sake, don't do this," Frank whispered to the boy, keeping his voice low so Richard wouldn't hear. "That bull is too dangerous. It's not worth risking your life for money." "It's not just about the money, Mr. Frank," Tyler replied, looking at the man who had always treated him like a son. "It's about my family's honor. I can't let people speak badly of my father." Frank sighed, recognizing in the boy's expression the same stubbornness Nathan had always shown. He knew it would be useless to try to dissuade Tyler once the boy had made up his mind. "Then at least listen to my advice," Frank murmured, checking to make sure Richard wasn't paying attention. "Never turn your back on the bull. Keep your eyes on him at all times and try to stay close to the fences. If he charges at you, run to the side, never straight ahead." Tyler absorbed every word, committing the instructions to memory. He knew this would likely be his only chance to survive the next 5 minutes. Richard approached the gate of the pen, playing with the keys hanging from his belt. The rancher was clearly enjoying the whole situation, as if it were just another spectacle. To break the monotony of the day, "Before we begin, I want everyone here to bear witness," Richard shouted, pointing to the men gathered around. "If the boy can stay in the pen for 5 minutes without running away, I'll forgive the entire Johnson family's debt. If he fails, they'll have to pay every last penny." Several men nodded, confirming they'd heard the terms of the deal. Tyler felt a tightness in his chest as he realized there was no turning back now. If he backed out at this moment, he'd be seen as a coward for the rest of his life. "It's time." Richard unlocked the gate and slowly opened it. "Step inside, boy, and may God have mercy on your soul." Tyler took a deep breath and took his first step into the pen. The ground was covered with a thin layer of sand and packed dirt, trampled by the bull's hooves over the months. The strong smell of the animal mixed with the scent of dry earth filled his nostrils, making him feel momentarily dizzy. Black Devil stood on the far side of the pen, but as soon as he noticed the intruder, he turned his massive head toward Tyler. The bull's eyes burned with a primal fury, and a deep, threatening sound rumbled from his throat. "Timer starts now," Richard shouted, holding up a gold wristwatch. 5 minutes from this moment." Tyler took a few more cautious steps into the corral, always keeping a safe distance from the fence so he'd have somewhere to run if needed. Black Devil watched him closely, shaking his head threateningly and scraping his right hoof on the ground repeatedly. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The boy and the bull stared at each other like two ancient gladiators, each sizing up the other's intentions. Tyler could hear his own breathing and the rapid pounding of his heart, which felt like it might leap out of his throat. Then, without warning, Black Devil lowered his head and charged toward Tyler with surprising speed for an animal of that size. The boy followed Frank's advice and darted to the side, feeling the wind from the bull's passing brush his face. "First charge," Richard cheered as if watching a show. 4 minutes and 40 seconds left. Tyler tried to steady his breathing as Black Devil turned for another charge. The bull seemed even angrier for having missed his target, snorting loudly, and spraying saliva on the ground. The boy realized he was trapped in one corner of the corral, exactly where he shouldn't be. He tried to move toward the center, but Black Devil anticipated the move and blocked his path, forcing Tyler to stay put. 3 minutes and 15 seconds. Richard continued his grim countdown. The bull's second charge was even fiercer than the first. Tyler dodged by mere inches, feeling the animal's horn graze his shirt and leave a small tear in the fabric. The boy rolled on the ground and managed to escape the corner, but now Black Devil seemed to have figured out his strategy. The bull stopped making blind charges and began circling Tyler, always keeping a steady distance. It was as if the animal was toying with its prey, savoring the moment before the final attack. 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Tyler felt his legs begin to tremble. Exhaustion was setting in, and he knew he couldn't keep this up much longer. His clothes were soaked with sweat, and the dust kicked up by the bull's movements made it hard to breathe. Then, something unexpected happened. Black Devil suddenly stopped moving and tilted his head, as if listening to a sound no one else could hear. The bull stood motionless for a few seconds, ears perked and body tense. Tyler used the pause to try and figure out what had caught the animal's attention. That's when he noticed one of the men watching the spectacle whispering to Frank Miller, both looking agitated about something. 1 minute and 40 seconds. Richard kept shouting, though his voice now sounded less confident. The bull started moving again, but differently this time. Instead of preparing another charge, Black Devil began sniffing the air as if searching for a particular scent. Tyler didn't understand what was happening, but saw a chance to reposition himself in the corral. As the boy carefully moved toward the center, Richard noticed the change in his bull's behavior. The rancher stopped checking his watch and focused on the animal, clearly worried about something. 50 seconds! Tyler was so focused on watching Black Devil's movements that he barely noticed when a familiar figure appeared outside the corral. Amanda Johnson, his mother, stood by the fence, her face pale with worry and eyes brimming with tears. "Tyler?" she shouted, completely ignoring Richard and the other men. "Get out of there right now." The sound of his mother's voice had an immediate effect on Tyler, but it also caught the attention of Black Devil. The bull turned its head toward Amanda and let out a loud bellow that made everyone instinctively step back. 30 seconds. Tyler felt a mix of relief and tension. He was almost done with the challenge, but his mother's presence made him even more nervous. He couldn't let her witness a possible accident. Then, Black Devil did something completely unexpected. Instead of attacking Tyler, the bull slowly moved toward the fence where Amanda stood, as if drawn to something about her. 15 seconds! Tyler realized he had a unique opportunity. With Black Devil distracted by his mother, the boy positioned himself near the gate, ready to leave as soon as time ran out. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, time's up, Richard shouted, but his voice no longer carried the malicious joy from before. Tyler ran out of the corral and straight into his mother's arms. She held him tightly, crying with relief. The men around them clapped quietly, impressed by the boy's courage. "Good job, kid," Frank Miller said, stepping forward and patting Tyler's shoulder. "You did it." But when Tyler looked at Richard, he saw the rancher didn't seem pleased at all. The man was watching Black Devil, who remained near the fence where Amanda had been behaving strangely. "That doesn't count," Richard suddenly said, making everyone turn to him. "The kid only made it because the bull got distracted. That's not fair." "You didn't set any rules about distractions," Frank replied firmly. "The deal was staying in the corral for 5 minutes, and that's what Tyler did." "Shut your mouth, Frank," Richard snapped, clearly frustrated he'd lost his bet. "I decide what's fair on my property." Amanda stepped toward the rancher, still holding Tyler. Though she was small and delicate, there was a determination in her eyes that made Richard take a step back. "Richard Coleman," she said firmly. "Everyone here heard the terms of the agreement. My son did his part and now you'll do yours." "My part?" Richard laughed scornfully. "And who's going to make me? What can you possibly do to me?" Tyler felt anger burning in his chest again. He'd risked his life to save his family's honor, and now this man wanted to go back on his word. "You're a liar," Tyler said, pulling away from his mother and facing Richard. "Your word means nothing." "Watch your mouth, kid," Richard threatened, stepping closer with clenched fists. "Or you'll find out I can be much worse than you imagined." Then Frank placed himself between Richard and the Johnson family. Other ranch hands also stepped forward, clearly unhappy with their boss's attitude. "Boss, with all due respect," Frank said, "you made a deal in front of all of us. If you break it, your word won't mean anything around here." Richard looked around and realized he was losing the support of his own workers. He knew he needed their loyalty to keep the ranch. Running and breaking his word publicly would be a grave mistake. "Fine," he grumbled, clearly displeased, "but I want you off my land, and if I hear you've been spreading lies about me, you'll regret it." Tyler and Amanda began walking away from the ranch, followed by Frank, who decided to accompany them to the main road. The relief of freeing his family from debt was slowly replaced by a strange feeling. Something wasn't right. "Mr. Frank," Tyler asked as they walked, "why did the Black Devil act that way when my mom showed up?" Frank looked at Amanda, who seemed just as puzzled by her son's question. The man hesitated for a moment before answering. "I don't know, kid. Maybe the bull got spooked by something. Animals can be unpredictable like that." But Tyler noticed something in Frank's expression that suggested he knew more than he was letting on. The boy decided not to push the matter right then, but kept the question in mind to look into later. When they reached the dirt road leading back to town, Amanda finally broke the silence that had settled between them. "Tyler, how did you find out about the debt?" she asked. stopping in her tracks and looking her son straight in the eyes. "Richard told me," Tyler replied, sensing something off about his mother's question. "He said Dad owed him $15,000. Amanda frowned and shook her head slowly. "That can't be right, son. Your father never mentioned any debt to Richard, and $15,000 is a lot of money for him to have borrowed without telling me." Tyler's stomach tightened. If his mother was right, it meant he had risked his life for nothing, or worse, that Richard had lied deliberately to humiliate him. "Are you sure?" Tyler asked, secretly hoping his mother was mistaken. "I am," Amanda said firmly. "Your father had his flaws, but he was always honest with me about money. If he had a debt that big, I'd know." Frank Miller, who had been listening to the whole conversation, stopped walking and turned to the Johnson family. His expression was graver than ever. "Amanda's right," he said slowly. "I've worked for Richard for 20 years, and I've never seen your Nathan borrow money. In fact, I remember Richard once saying your husband was one of the few men around here who never owed anyone a dime." Tyler felt like he'd been punched in the gut. If there was no debt, why had Richard made up the whole story? Why had he forced an 11-year-old boy to face a dangerous bull? "Then why did he do this to me?" Tyler asked, feeling angry tears burn his eyes. Frank glanced around to make sure no one was watching before answering. "Richard's a cruel man, Tyler. He enjoys seeing others suffer, especially the weak. He probably made up that debt story just for his own amusement." Amanda knelt in front of her son and cupped his face in her hands. "Son, you were very brave. Today. But I need you to promise me one thing. Never risk yourself like this again because of lies from people like Richard." Tyler nodded, but inside he was boiling with anger. He couldn't accept that a grown man could be so needlessly cruel. There was more to this, and he was determined to find out what. As they continued walking toward town, none of them noticed. They were being watched. Richard Coleman stood on his porch, holding a pair of binoculars and tracking the trio's every move. His face bore an expression of pure hatred that would have frightened anyone who saw it. "So you think you've won," Richard muttered to himself, "but this is far from over." The rancher went inside and headed to a study at the back of the house. The walls were covered in photos of prize-winning bulls and trophies from rural competitions. But Richard ignored these relics of past glories entirely. He unlocked a drawer in his desk and pulled out a folder full of documents. He quickly flipped through the papers until he found what he was looking for: a yellowed birth certificate, aged by time. Nathan Johnson. Richard read the name, aloud with contempt. Son of Mary Sorrow Johnson and unknown father. The farmer tucked the document back into the folder and locked it in the drawer again. Then he walked to the window and looked toward the road where Tyler, Amanda, and Frank had disappeared. "If you only knew who you really are, kid," Richard whispered, "you'd understand why I hate you so much." Meanwhile, in the town of Boulder Creek, news of the challenge between Tyler and Richard's bull was already spreading like wildfire. Frank Miller had stopped at a bar downtown for a beer before heading home, and he couldn't resist the temptation to tell the story to his friends. "You should have seen it," Frank said to a group of men gathered around his table. The kid stood face to face with the Black Devil for a full 5 minutes. Never seen such courage. "And Richard really forgave the debt?" asked Mark. The bar owner, a bald 50-year-old man who had known the Johnson family since they moved to Boulder Creek. "Had to," Frank replied, taking a sip of his beer. "He made the deal in front of everyone. No way to back out." "What debt?" "Was it again?" asked another man, Sebastian, who worked as a mechanic at the town's only auto shop. Frank hesitated for a moment. He didn't want to spread the suspicions Amanda had raised about whether the debt was real, at least not yet. $15,000, Frank answered vaguely. Richard said Nathan owed him. $15,000? Mark nearly choked on his beer. Nathan never had that kind of money to owe. He could barely pay his bills. Sebastian nodded. "That's true. I remember once he borrowed $100 from me to buy medicine for Tyler when the boy was sick. If he had a $15,000 debt, he wouldn't be worried about $100. A shiver ran down Frank's spine. His friend's words confirmed his suspicions that something was very wrong with Richard's story. But if there was no real debt, What was the true reason behind all that drama? "You think Richard made this up?" Frank asked quietly, checking that no one else was listening. Mark and Sebastian exchanged glances before answering. "Richard's capable of anything," Sebastian said. "Remember what happened to Paul Roberts?" Frank nodded grimly. Paul Roberts was a small farmer who'd had trouble with Richard a few years back. The man had been forced to sell his land for way below market value after Richard spread rumors about him around town. "But why would he do this to a boy?" Mark asked. "Tyler never hurt anyone." "Maybe the problem isn't with Tyler," Frank said thoughtfully. "Maybe it's with his family." The three men fell silent for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. Frank knew the Johnson family's history best, having worked for Richard for so long. "Do you know where the Johnson family came from?" Frank suddenly asked. "I know they're not from around here," Mark replied. "They came to Boulder Creek about 12 years ago when Tyler was just a little boy, and they never talked much about the past," Sebastian added. "Nathan always changed the subject when anyone asked where he was from." Frank finished his beer and stood up. "I'd better get going," he said. "But I think we should all keep an eye on the Johnson family. I've got a feeling Richard won't give up easily." After Frank left the bar, Mark and Sebastian kept talking about the day's events. None of them noticed that one of the men sitting at a table in the back of the establishment had overheard the entire conversation. Carl Wilson was one of Richard Coleman's foremen, responsible for overseeing work in the farthest pastures of the ranch. He was a tall, lean man with graying hair and a perpetually suspicious gaze. Unlike the other workers, Carl had a fanatical loyalty to the boss and would do anything to protect Richard's interests. As soon as he finished his drink, Carl discreetly left the bar and headed toward the ranch. He knew Richard would be interested to hear that the townsfolk were questioning the official version of events. Meanwhile, Tyler and Amanda arrived at their small house on the outskirts of Boulder Creek. It was a simple three-room structure with exposed brick walls and a clay-tiled roof. The backyard was small but well kept, with a few chickens Amanda raised to supplement the family income. Tyler collapsed onto his bed as soon as he entered his room, exhausted from the day's tension. His clothes were still dusty and sweaty, and his muscles ached as if he'd run a marathon. Amanda drew a warm bath for her son and reheated the dinner she'd prepared before leaving to search for him at the ranch. She had found out where Tyler was through a neighbor who had seen the boy walking toward Richard's property. "How did you know I was there?" Tyler asked during dinner. "Mrs. Mary told me she saw you heading to the ranch," Amanda replied, scooping more rice onto his plate. "I ran there as fast as I could. I couldn't imagine what you were doing in that place." Tyler told his mother the whole story, from the moment Richard had appeared at his school that morning to the challenge in the corral. Amanda listened quietly, but Tyler could see the worry growing on her face. "Richard came to your school?" she asked when Tyler finished. "Yeah, he showed up during recess and said he wanted to talk to me about Dad's debt." Amanda shook her head, clearly disturbed by this. "That's not right, Tyler. A grown man shouldn't seek out a kid at school to talk about debts. He should have come to me." Tyler had never thought about it, but now that his mother mentioned it, it did seem strange. Why had Richard chosen to approach an 11-year-old boy instead of speaking directly with his mother? "Do you think he was lying about the debt from the start?" Tyler asked. "I do," Amanda answered without hesitation. "Your father had his troubles, but he never hid money from me. If he owed $15,000 to Richard, I'd have known." "Then why did Richard do it?" Amanda sighed and looked out the kitchen window. Outside, night was falling over Boulder Creek and the first stars were appearing in the clear sky. "I don't know, son, but I'm afraid it might have something to do with your father's disappearance." A chill ran down Tyler's spine. He had never connected the two events, but now that his mother mentioned it, he wondered if it really was just a coincidence. "Do you think Richard knows where Dad is?" Tyler asked softly. "I don't know," Amanda repeated, "but I think we should be very careful. Men like Richard don't like to lose, and today you humiliated him in front of all his workers." Tyler finished dinner in silence, thinking about everything that had happened that day. There were so many unanswered questions, so many pieces. That didn't fit. He knew he wouldn't be able to sleep until he had at least some answers. After Amanda went to bed, Tyler stayed awake in his room, staring at the ceiling and trying to understand what was really happening. He had risked his life to protect his family's honor, but now he was discovering that maybe it had all been an elaborate lie. That's when he heard a strange noise coming from the backyard. It was a low, continuous sound, as if someone was rummaging around out there. Tyler got out of bed and went to the window, trying to see through the darkness. At first, he didn't notice anything unusual. The chickens were quiet on their perch and there was no sign of movement in the yard. But then a shadow shifted near the back gate and Tyler realized someone was trying to get onto their property. The boy felt his heart race. Was it Richard trying to get revenge, or one of his henchmen? Tyler thought about waking his mother, but decided to first try and find out who the intruder was. He left the room quietly and went to the kitchen, where there was a window that gave a better view of the yard. That's when he clearly saw the figure of a man trying to force open the gate lock. Tyler immediately recognized the thin frame and hunched posture. It was Carl Wilson, Richard's foreman. The man was clearly trying to sneak into the yard unnoticed, probably to spy on the family or plant some false evidence. The boy knew he had to act fast. If Carl got inside, he could cause serious trouble for his family. Tyler remembered there was a broom handle in the kitchen closet that he could use as a weapon if needed. He grabbed the handle and quietly made his way to the back door. His plan was simple: surprise Carl before he could fully open the gate. Tyler opened the door slowly, trying not to make noise. Carl had his back to him, focused on forcing the lock. The boy got as close as he could before shouting, "Hey, what are you doing here?" Carl turned quickly, clearly startled at being caught. His right hand held a screwdriver he'd been using to try and open the gate. "Tyler," Carl feigned surprise. "You scared me, kid. I was just checking if the gate was locked properly." "Liar," Tyler accused, pointing the broom handle at the man. "You were trying to break into our yard." Carl realized he'd been caught red-handed and quickly changed tactics. His face took on a threatening expression that made Tyler take a step back. "Listen here, boy," Carl said in a low, dangerous voice. "You humiliated my boss today, and that's not going to stand. Richard isn't the kind of man to forget an insult." "We didn't do anything wrong," Tyler replied, trying to keep his voice steady despite his fear. "Didn't do anything?" Carl laughed scornfully. "You made Richard look like a fool in front of all his workers. And on top of that, you've been spreading lies about him all over town." Tyler didn't understand what Carl was referring to. They hadn't spread any lies about Richard. "What lies?" Tyler asked. "Don't play innocent," Carl shot back. "We already know you've been saying your father's debt was fake. That's slander, and Richard can sue you for it." Tyler felt his blood run cold. How did Carl know they suspected the debt wasn't real? The only person they'd talked to about it was Frank Miller on the road. "How do you know that?" Tyler asked. Carl smiled maliciously. "Boulder Creek is a small town, kid. There are no secrets here. Richard has eyes and ears everywhere." The boy realized he was dealing with something far more complicated than he'd imagined. If Richard really had spies scattered throughout the city, it meant his family was being watched constantly. "What do you want from us?" Tyler asked, suddenly feeling very small and vulnerable. "We want you to leave Boulder Creek," Carl answered without hesitation. "This town isn't for you, never was." Before Tyler could respond, a light turned on in the kitchen. Amanda had woken up from the noise of the conversation and was approaching the back door. "Tyler?" she called. "Who are you talking to?" Carl realized he'd lost the advantage of secrecy and decided to leave before the situation got even more complicated. "Remember what I said, kid," he whispered to Tyler before quickly stepping away from the gate. "Richard won't forget." Tyler stood frozen in the yard until Carl disappeared completely into the darkness. Only then did he head back inside, where his mother waited at the door with a worried expression. "Who was it?" Amanda asked. "Carl Wilson, one of Richard's enforcers," Tyler answered, still trying to process everything that had happened. "He was trying to get into our yard." Amanda turned pale. "Trying to get in? Why?" Tyler told his mother the entire conversation he'd had with Carl, including the threat to leave Boulder Creek. Amanda listened silently, but Tyler could see she was growing more and more frightened. "Son, I think we're caught up in something much bigger than we imagined, Amanda said when Tyler finished. What do you mean? If Richard really has spies all over town, it means there's something very important he wants to hide. And by the looks of it, it has something to do with our family. Tyler felt a knot in his stomach. Just a few hours ago, his biggest worry had been protecting his father's honor. Now he found himself involved in something that could be far more dangerous. Do you think we should leave town? Tyler asked. Amanda shook her head firmly. We're not running because of Richard's threats. This is our home and we've done nothing wrong. But we'll have to be very careful from now on. Mother and son went back inside and locked all the doors and windows tightly. Tyler tried to sleep, but the events of the day kept replaying in his head like a never-ending movie. He'd started the day as a normal kid, worried only about school and typical problems for his age. Now he was at the center of a mystery involving lies, threats, and secrets from the past that neither he nor his mother fully understood. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. The next morning, Tyler woke to the sound of loud voices coming from the street. He looked out the window and saw a small group of neighbors gathered in front of the Silver family's house 3 doors down. Amanda had also woken from the noise and was dressing quickly. I'll see what's going on, she told Tyler. You stay here. No, Mom, I'm coming with you. Amanda hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. After everything that had happened the night before, she didn't want to leave Tyler alone either. When they approached the group of neighbors, they learned someone had vandalized the Silvers' house overnight. The windows were broken and offensive words had been spray-painted on the walls. That's the 3rd house attack this week, said Mrs. Florence, a 60-year-old woman who lived on the corner. First it was Emmanuel's house, then Richard Robertson's, and now the Silvers. Did anyone see who did it? Amanda asked. That nobody saw anything, replied Gerald, Florence's husband, but everyone knows who's behind this. Tyler noticed all eyes turning toward him and his mother when Gerald spoke those words. There was a tension in the air that hadn't been there before. What do you mean? Amanda asked, clearly uncomfortable with the attention they were receiving. Oh, Amanda, Florence replied in a tone that wasn't exactly friendly. Everyone knows you and your son had trouble with Richard Coleman yesterday, and now suddenly these acts of vandalism start appearing around the neighborhood. Tyler felt as if he'd been slapped in the face. The neighbors were implying that he and his mother were responsible for the attacks on the houses. We have nothing to do with this, Tyler said, trying to keep the anger out of his voice. Of course not, kid, Gerald said in a tone that made it clear he didn't believe a word Tyler was saying. It's just a coincidence these things started happening right after you messed with Richard. Amanda grabbed Tyler's arm, stopping him from responding. She had sensed the situation turning hostile and thought it best to leave before things got worse. Let's go, Tyler, she said quietly. But as they started to walk away, Florence made a comment that stopped them in their tracks. Maybe it'd be best if you found somewhere else to live. Boulder Creek is a peaceful town and we don't need people who bring trouble. Tyler spun around, ready to retort, but Amanda held him tighter. It's not worth it, son, she whispered. Let's go home. As they walked back, Tyler felt rage boiling inside him. How could the neighbors accuse his family of something so terrible? They had always been respectful people and never caused trouble with anyone. Mom, do you think Richard is behind these attacks? Tyler asked once they got home. I do, Amanda answered without hesitation. It's exactly the kind of thing a man like him would do. Stir up trouble in the neighborhood and then pin the blame on us. But why? What did we ever do to him? Amanda sat at the kitchen table and motioned for Tyler to do the same. Son, I think it's time I told you some things about our family's past. Things your father asked me never to reveal. Tyler's heart raced. He was finally going to uncover some of the secrets that had surrounded his family for so long. Your father wasn't from Boulder Creek, Amanda began slowly. Actually, he was born here, but he left when he was very young. He only came back 12 years ago when you were just a few months old. Why did he leave? Because he discovered something about his own family that terrified him. Something that involved Richard Coleman. Tyler leaned forward, eager to hear more. Your father and Richard were half-brothers, Amanda revealed, watching the shock spread across her son's face. Half-brothers? Tyler barely managed to speak. Yes, they had the same father, but different mothers. Their father was a wealthy farmer who had several children with different women. Richard was the legitimate son, the heir to everything. Your father was a bastard, entitled to nothing. Tyler felt as if the world was spinning around him. Richard Coleman was his uncle? How was that possible? But why did Dad never tell me this? Because he was afraid of Richard, Amanda explained. When your grandfather was about to die, he decided to divide his inheritance among all his children, legitimate and illegitimate. Richard was furious and did everything he could to stop it. And did he succeed? He did. He convinced his father that the bastard children only wanted his money and didn't truly care about the family. Your grandfather changed the will and left everything to Richard. Tyler tried to process all this information. If your father was the son of the same man as Richard, that meant he should have been entitled to a share of the inheritance too. How much money was it? A lot. Of money, Tyler. Richard's ranch, all the land, the cattle, all of it should have been split among 5 children. Richard kept everything for himself. And the other children, what happened to them? Amanda took a deep breath before continuing. Your father had 4 half-brothers. 2 of them left the area and never came back. A third had a strange accident just a few months after the will was changed. What kind of accident? He was working on one of the local ranches when an electric fence that should have been off was still running. He was electrocuted. Tyler felt a chill run down his spine. He was starting to understand why his father had been so afraid of Richard. And the 4th brother? That one scared your father the most. He tried to challenge the will in court, saying your grandfather wasn't in his right mind when he changed the inheritance. But before the case could go to trial, he disappeared. Disappeared like Dad. Just like your father. Left home one morning and was never seen again. Tyler felt like he was discovering he lived in a thriller movie. His family was tangled up in something far more complicated and dangerous than he'd ever imagined. Do you think Richard had something to do with them? I can't prove anything, Amanda answered carefully. But your father always believed so. That's why he decided to leave Boulder Creek when he was young. He was afraid Richard would try something with him too. But then why did he come back? Because of me, Amanda admitted, tears in her eyes. I got pregnant with you when we were living in New York. Your father was desperate because we had no money or jobs in the big city. He decided to come back to Boulder Creek because he knew the place and thought he could find work easier. Tyler stood up from the chair and began pacing the kitchen. Everything made sense now. Richard's hostility, the fake story about the debt, the threats. It was all part of a plan to force his family out of town again. Does Richard know you know all this? I don't know. Your father was always very careful to make sure no one found out about our connection to the Coleman family. We changed our last name when we came back here. We changed our last name? Tyler stopped pacing. What was our real name? Coleman? Amanda answered softly. You're Tyler and Nathan Coleman, not Johnson. Tyler felt like he just discovered he was a completely different person. His whole identity was built on a lie created to protect him from an uncle he didn't even know existed. So Richard really is my uncle? Yes, son, and that means you have just as much right to that ranch as he does. Tyler stopped again, this time with his eyes shining with new understanding. That's why he hates me so much. He's afraid I'll find out the truth and try to claim my share of the inheritance. Exactly, Amanda confirmed. And that's why he put on that whole show yesterday. He wants you to feel humiliated and scared, so you never dare to challenge him. Tyler sat back down, trying to sort through all the thoughts racing through his head. Now he understood why Black Devil had acted so strangely when his mother showed up in the corral. The bull must have recognized something familiar in her, some scent or presence that reminded him of his father. Mom, do you think Dad's still alive? I hope so, son, but I don't know where he could be. What if he didn't disappear on his own? What if Richard did something to him? Amanda turned pale at her son's question. I don't even want to think about that, Tyler. I'd rather believe your father left to protect us and that one day he'll come back. Tyler nodded, but inside he was determined to uncover the truth about his father's disappearance. Now that he knew about his family's connection to Richard, he had solid leads to investigate. What should we do now? Tyler asked. We have to be very careful, Amanda replied. Richard can't find out you know the truth. If he does, he might try something even worse. Tyler agreed, but he was already planning his next move. He wasn't going to stand by while Richard kept threatening his family. Somehow he'd find a way to prove Richard was responsible for his father's disappearance and the other strange incidents that had happened over the years. The boy spent the rest of the morning thinking about how he could investigate without raising suspicion. He knew he'd need help, but he couldn't trust just anyone. Richard had made it clear he had spies all over town. Then he remembered Frank Miller. The man had worked for Richard many years ago and knew all the secrets of the ranch. If anyone could help him, it was Frank. Tyler decided he'd look for Frank that afternoon after the man finished work. But first, he had to leave the house, without his mother suspecting his intentions. At lunch, Tyler acted normal, chatting about everyday things and pretending he was coming to terms with the situation. Amanda seemed more relaxed, thinking her son had taken her advice to heart. "Mom, I'm going to Johnny's house this afternoon," Tyler said, referring to a school friend. "We're working on a history project together." "All right, son, but don't stay out too late, and if anything strange happens, come straight home." Tyler promised to be careful and left the house around 2 in the afternoon. But instead of going to Johnny's, he headed to Mark's bar, where he knew Frank usually stopped for a beer after work. The bar was empty when Tyler arrived, except for Mark, who was wiping glasses behind the counter. "Tyler," Mark greeted the kid with a smile. "How are you, boy? Heard you gave Richard a hard time yesterday." "I'm fine, Mr. Mark," Tyler replied, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening. "Do you know what time Mr. Frank usually comes by?" "He's always here around 3:30, Mark answered. "Why? Something wrong?" Tyler hesitated. He wanted to trust Mark, but he remembered what Carl had said about Richard having spies everywhere. "I just need to talk to him about something," Tyler said vaguely. Mark sensed Tyler didn't want to elaborate and didn't push. He poured the boy a soda and went back to work, leaving Tyler alone with his thoughts. A few minutes past 3:30, Frank Miller walked into the bar. He greeted Mark and ordered his usual beer, only then noticing Tyler. "Tyler?" Frank seemed surprised. "What are you doing here, kid?" "I need to talk to you about something important," Tyler said quietly. "But we can't talk here." Frank glanced around the bar, picking up on the worry in Tyler's voice. "All right, let's talk outside." The two left the bar and walked to a small square in the town center, where old trees shaded a few benches. Frank waited for Tyler to start. "Mr. Frank, did you know my father when he was young?" Tyler asked directly. Frank tensed at the question. "Why do you want to know that, Tyler?" "Because my mother told me today that my father and Richard are half-brothers, and that Richard stole the inheritance that should have been divided among all the children." Frank was visibly shocked. It was clear he didn't expect Tyler to know those details. "Your mother told you that?" "Yes, she did. And she also told me about my father's other brothers and how bad things happened to all of them." Frank stayed silent for a few moments, clearly trying to decide how much he should reveal. "Tyler, these are very dangerous things to talk about. If Richard finds out you know..." "He already knows I know something," Tyler interrupted. "Last night, one of his foremen showed up at my house making threats." Frank looked alarmed. "What kind of threats?" Tyler told him about Carl's visit and the attacks on the neighborhood houses. Frank listened with an increasingly worried expression. "Tyler, you and your mother are in real danger," Frank said when the boy finished. "Richard won't stop there. That's why I need your help, Mr. Frank. You've worked for him for 20 years. You must know things that can help me figure out what happened to my father." Frank shook his head slowly. "I know a lot of things, Tyler, but most of them will only put you in more danger. Please, Mr. Frank, I need to know the truth." Frank looked around to make sure they weren't being watched before speaking. "Your father really is Richard's half-brother, and you're right about the inheritance. Your grandfather, Sebastian Coleman, owned one of the biggest properties in the region. When he got older, he decided he wanted to be fair to all the children he had. How many children were there? 5. Richard was the only legitimate one born from his marriage to his first wife. The other 4 were children he had with different women over the years. And did they all live here? Yes, they did. Sebastian gave them all work and a place to live on the farm. It was like one big family despite the problems. Tyler imagined what it must have been like growing up in such a complicated family. What happened when my grandfather died? Before he died, he made a will dividing everything equally among the 5 children. Richard was furious because he always believed that, as the only legitimate son, he should inherit everything alone. And how did he manage to change that? Frank hesitated again before continuing. Richard convinced your father that the other children only cared about the money and that he was the only one who truly loved the family. Sebastian was sick and confused in his last months and ended up believing Richard's lies. Was my father there when this happened? Yes, he was. And that's when he realized what kind of person Richard really was. Your father tried to convince his brothers to challenge the new will, but they were too afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid of Richard. Even before inheriting everything, he already had a reputation as a violent man. No one wanted to cross him. Tyler was starting to understand the complexity of the situation his family had faced. What happened after my grandfather died? Richard took control of everything immediately, and he started making life impossible for his brothers. First, he fired them all from the farm. Then he began spreading lies about them around town. What kind of lies? He said they were lazy, dishonest, good for nothing. In no time, none of them could get a job anywhere in the region. Tyler felt anger growing inside him as Frank told the story. Is that when my father decided to leave? Yes. He realized Richard wouldn't stop until he destroyed all his brothers. Your father was young and smart, so he decided to try his luck somewhere else before things got worse. And the other brothers? Frank stayed silent for a long moment. 2 of them also left the area, as your mother already told you. But the other 2, what happened to them? One of them, John Coleman, tried to resist. He stayed in town and started working as a mason, but Richard did everything he could to sabotage his work. He spread rumors that John was incompetent, even bribed clients to cancel contracts. And even then, he didn't leave? John was as stubborn as your father. He thought he shouldn't run away from anywhere just because Richard wanted him to. But then the accident with the electric fence happened. Tyler felt a chill. Do you think it was really an accident? Frank looked directly into Tyler's eyes before answering. I was working on that farm the day of the accident. The electric fence had been turned off that morning for maintenance. John was working on fixing the posts when it happened. And then, the power was turned back on in the middle of the work, with no one warning John. He was holding the wire when the current came back. Who turned the power back on? Officially, it was a miscommunication between the workers, but I saw Carl Wilson messing with the power box just minutes before the accident. Tyler felt like he'd been punched in the gut. Carl, the same man who had shown up at his house the night before, was involved in his uncle's death. You never told anyone about this? And who would I tell, Tyler? Carl has worked for Richard for over 15 years. No one would believe my word over his. Tyler was beginning to understand the extent of Richard's power and cruelty. The man hadn't just stolen his brother's rightful inheritance, he'd also physically eliminated those who tried to resist. And the 4th brother, what happened to him? That was the youngest, Peter Coleman. He was terrified after John's death and decided to try to reclaim the inheritance legally. He hired a lawyer from out of town and filed a lawsuit challenging the will. And what happened? The case was going well. The lawyer had found several irregularities in the new will, and there was a good chance of getting it all overturned. But a week before the final hearing, Peter disappeared. Disappeared how? He left home one morning saying he was meeting the lawyer in town. No one ever saw him again. Tyler felt like he was listening to a horror story, except it was all real and involved his own family. And the lawyer? What did he do? He said Peter never showed up at his office. Without the client, the case was automatically dismissed. No one looked for Peter. His family filed a police report, but the police said there was no evidence of a crime, that Peter had probably run away on his own. Tyler shook his head, unable to believe so much injustice. And now the same thing is happening to my father. I'm afraid so, Tyler. When your father came back to Boulder Creek 12 years ago, Richard was furious. He thought he'd gotten rid of all the brothers for good. So that's why Richard made up that story about the debt. Exactly. He wanted to force you all out of town without raising suspicion, but when you took on the bull challenge, you ruined all his plans. Tyler felt a mix of pride and fear. He'd done better than expected in the confrontation with Richard, but now he understood it had made his situation even more dangerous. Frank, do you have any idea where my father might be? Frank hesitated for a long moment before answering. I have a suspicion, but it's very dangerous to investigate. Please tell me. There's a part of Richard's farm where no one's allowed to go. It's an isolated area, far from the main house, where he says he keeps important equipment. Equipment? Richard always said it's where he stores the expensive farm machinery, the new tractors, things like that. But no employee was ever allowed to go in there. Tyler felt his heart race. Do you think my father could be trapped there? I don't know, Tyler, but it's strange that such a large area of the ranch is off limits to all the workers. Tyler was determined to investigate that mysterious area, but he knew he'd need a careful plan. How could I get there without being seen? Tyler, no. Frank was alarmed. You can't even think about doing something like that. If Richard catches you trespassing on his ranch, he could do anything to you. But if my dad is trapped there, I have to help him. And what if he's not? What if it's just a storage area? You'd be risking everything for nothing. Tyler knew Frank was right, but he couldn't accept the idea of doing nothing while his father might be in danger. At least tell me where that area is, Tyler insisted. Frank sighed, realizing Tyler wouldn't give up easily. It's on the north side of the ranch near the river. There's a dirt road that leads there, but usually there's a locked gate blocking the way. What kind of buildings are there? From what I can see from a distance, there are a few large sheds, but I've never gotten close enough to be sure. Tyler memorized every detail. He still didn't know how, but he'd find a way to investigate that area. Frank, can you help me get there? Tyler, I have a family to support. If Richard finds out I helped you, he'll fire me on the spot. And at my age, it's not easy to find another job. Tyler understood Frank's difficult position, but he couldn't give up. Then at least tell me about the ranch's schedule. When are there fewer people working? Frank looked around before answering. Sunday morning is the quietest time. Most workers are off and Richard usually goes into town to handle business. What about the foreman? Carl always works, but he usually stays near the main house. The other foreman takes Sundays off too. Tyler began forming a plan in his mind. If he could sneak onto the ranch Sunday morning and head straight for the restricted area, maybe he could uncover what Richard was hiding. Frank, if I decide to investigate, can you at least warn me if someone's coming my way? How would I do that? I don't know, maybe with a signal or something. Frank shook his head. Tyler, you're talking about something very dangerous. If anything happens to you, your mother will never forgive me. If I don't try to find the truth, I might lose my father forever, Tyler argued. And in the end, Richard will keep threatening us until he gets what he wants. Frank recognized the determination in the boy's voice and knew it would be hard to dissuade him. If I agree to help, do you promise to be very careful? And at the first sign of danger, you'll run. I promise, Tyler answered without hesitation. All right, Sunday morning I'll be working near the ranch's main entrance. If I see anyone heading north, I'll give a signal. What kind of signal? I'll whistle 3 times in a row. If you hear that, get out of there immediately, no matter what you're doing. Tyler nodded, grateful for Frank's help. And if I find something important, how do I let you know? Don't tell me. If you find any evidence, go straight to the police or a lawyer from out of town. Don't trust anyone in Boulder Creek. The two talked for a few more minutes, finalizing the details of the plan. When they said goodbye, Tyler was eager for Sunday to arrive, but he was also terrified of what he might discover. On the way back home, Tyler thought about telling his mother about the conversation with Frank, but decided it would be better not to worry her even more. If he found concrete evidence, then he would tell her everything. When he got home, Amanda was in the kitchen preparing dinner. She asked about the school project with Johnny, and Tyler lied, saying everything had gone fine. That night, Tyler stayed awake planning his investigation. He knew he would only have one chance to uncover what was hidden in the restricted area of the farm, and he needed to be prepared for any situation. On Friday and Saturday, Tyler acted normally, going to school and helping his mother with chores, but inside he was counting the hours until he could put his plan into action. On Saturday evening, while Amanda watched TV in the living room, Tyler checked all the details of his plan one last time. He would leave the house very early on Sunday, saying he was going fishing at the river with some friends. That would give him several hours to investigate without raising suspicion. Tyler also packed a small backpack with a few things that might be useful. A flashlight, a small knife, a notebook to write down anything important he found, and a water bottle. When he finally went to bed, Tyler was still too nervous to relax. He lay staring at the ceiling for hours, imagining all the possibilities of what might happen the next day. Would he really find his father locked up in some shed? Or would he discover evidence that something terrible had happened to him? What if Richard or Carl caught him trespassing on the property? Tyler tried to push away those dark thoughts and focus on what he needed to do. No matter how dangerous it was, he couldn't keep living without knowing the truth about what had happened to his family. Finally, he fell asleep in the early hours of the morning, dreaming of black bulls, mysterious farms, and a father calling his name from somewhere far away. Sunday dawned cloudy, with a cold wind hinting at possible rain. Tyler woke up at 5:30, even before his alarm went off. His stomach twisted with nerves, but he knew there was no turning back. He dressed in dark, comfortable clothes, grabbed his pre-packed backpack, and slipped out of the house quietly. Amanda was still fast asleep, exhausted after a full week of hard work as a seamstress. The streets of Boulder Creek were deserted at that early hour. Tyler walked quickly toward Richard's farm, following a route he had carefully planned to avoid houses where people might recognize him. When he got close to the property line, he stopped to observe the activity. Just as Frank had predicted, there was very little movement, only a few workers tending to animals near the main farmhouse far from where he intended to go. Tyler circled the property until he found a spot where the fence was lower and in worse condition. Carefully, he slipped under the wires without hurting himself and officially trespassed onto Richard Coleman's farm. The boy's heart pounded, so hard he was sure anyone within 100 yards could hear it. He took several deep breaths, trying to calm himself, and began walking toward the northern part of the property. The terrain was uneven, with small grassy hills and patches of thicker woods. Tyler used these areas for cover, always staying hidden behind trees or rises in the land. After nearly an hour of careful walking, Tyler finally spotted the buildings Frank had mentioned. There were indeed several large sheds, all painted dark gray with few windows. An iron gate separated the area from the rest of the farm, but Tyler noticed he could get around it by passing through a section where the fence was partially broken. As he got closer, Tyler saw something that made his blood run cold. There were fresh tire marks in the dirt in front of the sheds, indicating vehicles had been there very recently. This meant the area wasn't just an abandoned storage space, as Richard had made it seem. Tyler hid behind a large tree and watched the buildings for several minutes, looking for any sign of movement. Everything seemed quiet, but he could hear a low, steady sound coming from one of the sheds, as if some kind of machinery was running inside. After making sure no one was around, Tyler approached the first shed. The building was larger than it had seemed from a distance, with tall concrete walls and a metal roof. There was a main door locked with a heavy padlock, but Tyler found a small window on the side of the building. Climbing onto a pile of old wood leaning against the wall, he managed to peer through the dusty window. What he saw inside left him both confused and frightened. The shed wasn't filled with farming equipment like Richard had always claimed. Instead, it was divided into several smaller sections by wooden walls, almost like cells or tiny rooms. There were simple beds in some of these spaces, along with buckets and other objects that suggested the place was used to hold people. Tyler's legs trembled. Could Richard really be keeping people locked up here? He could see that one of the sections seemed occupied, but he couldn't make out who was there because of the distance and dim lighting. The boy climbed down from the woodpile and headed to the second shed, hoping to find a better way to see what was happening inside. This second building had a larger window closer to the ground. When Tyler looked through it, he nearly gasped in shock and relief at the same time. Inside, sitting on a narrow bed and reading an old book, was his father. Nathan Johnson looked thinner and grayer than Tyler remembered, but he was clearly alive and didn't seem seriously hurt. He wore simple, clean clothes, and there was a small table with food and water beside his bed. Tyler tapped lightly on the window, trying to get his father's attention without making too much noise. Nathan looked toward the window with surprise and confusion until he realized who was outside. "Tyler?" Nathan whispered, moving closer to the window. "My God, what are you doing here?" "Dad!" Tyler whispered back, feeling tears of relief stream down his face. "I knew you hadn't abandoned us." "How did you find me?" Nathan asked, clearly worried. "This place is dangerous, son. You need to leave right now." "I'm not leaving without you, Dad. How can we get you out?" Nathan shook his head. "It's not possible, Tyler. Richard has kept me here for 3 months. The door is locked from the outside, and he has guards who check in regularly." "Guards? How many?" "2 men who take shifts. There's usually always one around, but I haven't seen anyone this morning." Tyler glanced around, confirming no one was watching at the moment. "Dad, I found out about our family, about the inheritance Richard stole. Mom told me everything." Nathan paled. "Amanda shouldn't have told you those things. It's too dangerous for you to know." "Why is Richard keeping you locked up here? What does he want?" "He wants me to sign some papers, Tyler. Papers that would officially transfer any rights I might have over my father's inheritance. So far I've refused, but he's growing more impatient by the day." Tyler felt anger burning in his chest. Richard hadn't just stolen the inheritance. Now, he was trying to force his father to officially give up his rights. "And if you don't sign?" Nathan hesitated before answering. "Richard told me if I don't sign by the end of this week, he'll do the same thing to you and your mother as he did to me." Tyler's blood ran cold. Richard was using him and his mother as leverage to force his father to cooperate. "Dad, we need to get out of here and go to the police." "Tyler, Richard has the local police in his pocket. The sheriff of Boulder Creek has been taking money for years to ignore what happens on this ranch." Tyler remembered Frank's advice about not trusting anyone in town. "Then let's go to a bigger city. We'll find outside help." "How, son? I'm trapped here, and you don't have money or a way to leave Boulder Creek." Tyler realized his father was right. Even if he could free him now, they'd still have to face Richard's power and influence. "There has to be a way, Dad. I can't leave you here." Just then, Tyler heard the sound Frank had promised to use as a signal. 3 whistles in a row coming from the direction of the ranch entrance. Someone was approaching the restricted area. "Dad, someone's coming. I need to hide, but I'll be back to get you out." "Tyler, no, it's too dangerous. Forget about me and take care of your mother." But Tyler was already moving away from the window, searching for a hiding spot. He found a thick patch of brush about 50 yards from the sheds and crouched behind a fallen log. Minutes later, he saw Carl Wilson arriving in an old pickup truck. The foreman parked in front of the first shed and stepped out carrying a cardboard box. Carl unlocked the shed door with a key from his pocket and went inside. Tyler could hear voices, but couldn't make out the words. After a few minutes, Carl left the first shed and headed to the second, where Tyler's father was being held. The boy tensed, worried about what the man might do to Nathan. Carl entered the second shed, and soon Tyler heard raised voices as if an argument had broken out. He caught fragments: documents, deadline, last chance. When Carl finally emerged, his expression was clearly irritated. He locked the door with unnecessary force and stormed back to his truck, peeling out in a cloud of dust. Tyler waited a few more minutes to be sure Carl was gone before returning to his father's window. Nathan looked shaken and anxious. "What did he want, Dad?" "He brought the papers Richard wants me to sign. Said if I don't sign by tomorrow, they'll come after you and your mother." Tyler felt like he'd been punched in the gut. "We can't let that happen, Dad. There has to be something we can do." "Tyler, listen carefully. You need to convince your mother to leave Boulder Creek today. Take whatever you can carry and get as far away as possible." "What about you?" "I'll sign the papers. It's the only way to keep you both safe." "No," Tyler protested. We won't abandon you. Tyler, if you really want to help me, do what I'm asking. Take your mother away from here and build a new life somewhere else. Tyler knew his father was trying to protect them, but he couldn't, except running away and leaving him to Richard's mercy. Dad, what if I bring help? Frank Miller knows this area, and a few other people in town who don't like Richard. Tyler, I already tried to get help before I was arrested. Richard has a lot of power here. People are afraid of him. But now I know where you are. I can bring people from outside town. Nathan looked at his son with a mix of pride and worry. You've grown so much these past 3 months, Tyler, but this situation is more dangerous than you realize. Why, Dad? What else haven't you told me? Nathan hesitated before answering. Richard isn't acting alone, Tyler. He has partners in other cities, influential people who help keep this scheme running. What scheme? I'm not the first person he's kept locked up here. Over the years, Richard has used this place to force people to give up properties, inheritances, anything he wanted. Tyler felt like he was discovering Richard was even worse than he'd imagined. Do you know these other people? I've met some of them while I've been here. Most ended up giving in to Richard's pressure and signing what he wanted. After that, they were released, but they had to leave the area. And those who didn't sign, Nathan fell silent for a long moment. I'd rather not talk about that, Tyler. The boy understood there were even worse things his father didn't want to tell him, to protect him. Dad, how many people are locked up here now? Besides me, there are at least 2 more in the first warehouse. A farmer from a nearby town and a middle-aged woman who inherited some land Richard wants to buy. Tyler realized he was dealing with a much larger criminal operation than he'd thought. Richard wasn't just a greedy man who'd stolen his family's inheritance. He was the leader of an organized extortion and kidnapping scheme. Tyler, you have to promise me one thing, Nathan said urgently. If anything happens to me, you'll take care of your mother and never try to get revenge on Richard. Promise. I won't promise that, Dad. If he does anything to you, I'll... Tyler! Nathan cut him off. You're just a kid. You can't fight men like Richard. Promise me you'll be smart and protect your mother. Tyler knew his father was right, but the anger he felt was stronger than any rational thought. Okay, Dad. I promise I'll take care of Mom. And promise me that if things get too dangerous, you'll both leave town without looking back. Tyler hesitated before answering. I promise. Nathan seemed relieved, but Tyler was lying. He had no intention of leaving without trying to save his father. Now you need to go, Tyler. If anyone finds you here, it'll ruin any chance we still have. When will I see you again? I don't know, son. Maybe never. Tyler felt, tears burning his eyes. Don't talk like that, Dad. I'll find a way to get you out of here. I love you, Tyler. Never forget that. I love you too, Dad. Tyler stepped away from the window with a broken heart. He'd found his father, alive, but he was being forced to leave him behind again. The feeling of helplessness was almost unbearable. The boy began the journey back home, but his mind was racing, thinking of possible plans to help his father. He knew he couldn't count on the local police, and he didn't have the resources to seek help in other cities. But there was one thing Tyler could do: document everything he'd discovered and find a way to expose Richard publicly. If he could prove the man was holding people captive, maybe public pressure would force the authorities to act. When he got home, Tyler found his mother worried in the kitchen. Where were you, Tyler? You left so early you didn't even tell me properly. I went fishing with some friends, Mom. Sorry I didn't give you a better heads up. Amanda looked at her son with suspicion. What friends? You didn't bring any fish. Tyler realized he'd forgotten to come up with a good excuse. The fish weren't biting today, and the kids left early because it started getting cold. Amanda didn't seem entirely convinced, but decided not to press the issue. Tyler, we need to talk about something serious. I've been thinking about our conversation on Friday, and I think maybe it's best if we leave Boulder Creek for a while. Tyler felt his stomach tighten. His mother was having exactly the reaction his father had predicted. Why, Mom? Because I'm afraid of what Richard might do to us. Last night I kept thinking about the stories I told you about your father's brothers, and I realized we might be in the same danger. But we didn't do anything wrong. It doesn't matter, Tyler. Men like Richard don't need a reason to hurt people. They do what they want because they have power. Tyler knew his mother was right, but now that he'd found his father, he couldn't just leave. Where would we go? I have a cousin in Washington who might be able to help us. We can stay with her until we get settled somewhere else. And how would we even leave? We don't have money or a car. We can sell some things and buy bus tickets. We don't need to take much, just the essentials. Tyler realized his mother had already thought through every detail. She was truly scared enough to leave everything they had in Boulder Creek. Mom, can you just give me a few days to think about it? It's a really big decision. Amanda looked at her son in surprise. Tyler, I thought you'd be relieved at the idea of leaving here. After everything that happened with Richard. I am, Mom. I just want to be sure it's the right thing to do. All right, but we can't take too long to decide. If we're really leaving, it's better to do it soon. Tyler spent the rest of Sunday trying to come up with a plan to help his father. He knew he had very little time before Richard lost his patience and did something even worse. That afternoon, Tyler decided to find Frank Miller to tell him what he'd discovered. He knew he was risking putting Frank in danger, but he needed an adult ally who understood the situation. Tyler found Frank working in his backyard, fixing a fence that had been damaged by the wind. Mr. Miller, I need to talk to you about something really important. Frank looked around to make sure no one was watching before answering. What's wrong, Tyler? You seem really worked up. I went to the farm this morning and I found my dad. Frank dropped the hammer he was holding. You did what? Tyler quickly told him everything he discovered, the modified sheds, the other people trapped there, the blackmail Richard was using against his father. Frank listened in silence, his expression growing grimmer by the minute. Tyler, do you have any idea how much danger you were in? If Richard knew you were there. But I found out where my dad is. Now we can do something to help him. What can we do, Tyler? We're just two people up against a man who has resources, armed thugs, and connections to corrupt authorities. Tyler felt like Frank was giving up before even trying. You're not going to help me. Frank let out a deep sigh. Tyler, of course I want to help. Your father was always a good man, and what Richard's doing is terrible. But we have to be realistic about our chances. So what do you suggest? I think your mother's right. You should leave Boulder Creek as soon as possible. And just abandon my dad? If you stay here, Richard will end up trapping you too. Then there'll be no one left free to get help. Tyler knew Frank had a valid point, but he couldn't bring himself to accept the idea of running away. Mr. Miller, what if we could get some evidence of what Richard is doing? Photos of the warehouses, testimonies from the people trapped there. How would you manage that without getting caught? I don't know yet, but there has to be a way. Frank stared at Tyler for a long moment before answering. Tyler, I'll make you a deal. If you promise me you'll convince your mother to leave town, I promise I'll try to find a way to help your father. How? I don't know yet. But I know some people in other cities who might be able to help us. People who aren't afraid of Richard. Tyler felt a spark of hope. Really? Really? But you have to promise me you'll protect your mother and yourself. There's no point in saving your father if the two of you end up dead in the process. Tyler nodded, grateful to finally have an adult ally. How long do you think you'll need? Give me a week. If I can't arrange anything by then, you leave town without looking back. Tyler agreed to the terms, though he knew a week might be too long. If Richard had given his father until Monday to sign the papers, they only had one day. Mr. Miller, Richard said if my father doesn't sign some papers by tomorrow, he'll come after me and my mom. Frank paled. Then we don't have time to wait for outside help. We'll have to improvise something. What do you have in mind? I don't know yet. Let me think on it tonight. Tomorrow morning, I'll stop by your house so we can talk. Tyler walked home feeling a little more hopeful, but still deeply worried. There were too many variables out of his control, too many things that could go wrong. At dinner, Amanda noticed. Tyler was distracted and asked if he was feeling okay. So I'm fine, Mom, just thinking about things. What things? About the possibility of leaving town. It's a big change. Amanda nodded understandingly. I know, son. It's not easy for me either, thinking about leaving everything behind. But sometimes we have to make sacrifices to protect ourselves. Tyler wanted so badly to tell his mother he'd found his father, but he knew it would only make her more anxious and might push her into rash decisions. "Mom, if we really do leave, when would it be?" "Ideally this week. The longer we wait, the more dangerous it could get." Tyler felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He had to find a way to save his father before it was too late, but he also had to keep his mother safe. That night, Tyler barely slept. He lay staring at the ceiling, running through every possible plan to rescue his father. Most of them seemed impossible or far too dangerous. Around 3 in the morning, Tyler heard a strange noise coming from the backyard, a soft sound like someone fiddling with the back gate. He remembered Carl's visit a few days earlier and felt his blood run cold. Silently, he got up and went to the kitchen window. This time there were 2 figures in the yard, both dressed in dark clothes and wearing hats that hid their faces. Tyler recognized one of them as Carl Wilson, but couldn't place the second man. The 2 were clearly searching for something, rummaging around and whispering to each other. Tyler thought about waking his mother, but remembered she might panic and make noise that would alert the intruders. Instead, he decided to watch what they were doing. The men seemed to be looking for a way into the house without making a sound. They tested a few windows and tried forcing the back door, but everything was locked tight. After several minutes of unsuccessful attempts, Tyler heard one of the men say, "We won't be able to get in without waking everyone up. We'd better come back when we have a better opportunity." "Richard won't like hearing we failed," Carl replied. "Then we won't tell him. Let's say the house was empty and they've already fled town. What if he finds out we lied? How would he? He doesn't come here personally to check these things." The 2 men stepped away from the backyard, but Tyler kept watching until he was sure they were completely gone. Only then did he return to his room, his heart still racing. The visit from the henchman confirmed that Richard was indeed planning something against his family. Tyler knew they couldn't wait any longer to act. If they didn't do something soon, he and his mother would end up trapped in the same warehouses where his father was being held. On Monday morning, Tyler woke to someone knocking at the front door. Amanda went to answer and found Frank Miller, with a grave expression. "Good morning, Amanda. I need to speak with Tyler about something important." "Of course, Mr. Miller." "Tyler, come here." Tyler appeared in the living room still in his pajamas, but immediately sensed from Frank's expression that something had happened. "Tyler, I need to talk to you in private." Amanda looked between them curiously but didn't ask questions. "You can talk in the backyard," she suggested. Tyler and Frank stepped outside, where Frank checked that no one was nearby before speaking. "Tyler, the situation is worse than we thought. I spent the whole night reaching out to people in other towns, and I found out disturbing things about Richard." "What kind of things?" "He's not just some local farmer who got mixed up in shady business. Richard is part of an organized network operating in several towns across the region. They buy up land cheap through intimidation and blackmail." Tyler felt as if he'd just realized he was up against something much bigger than he'd imagined. "Does that mean we can't stop him?" "It means it's far more dangerous than we thought. But I also found something that might help us." "What?" "An investigative journalist from Chicago is interested in covering this scheme. He's been looking into Richard for months, but didn't have enough proof." A spark of hope flickered in. "Tyler, what if we show him the warehouses where my dad is being held?" "Exactly. If we can get the journalist there and he documents everything, the story will go national. Richard won't be able to cover it up." "When can the journalist get here?" "He said he could arrive this afternoon if we really have solid evidence to show him." Tyler knew this was the opportunity he'd been waiting for, but he also knew it would be extremely dangerous. "How do we show him the warehouses without getting caught?" "We'll need to create a distraction, something that draws the guards away long enough for the journalist to document everything." Tyler thought for a moment before an idea struck him. "Mr. Miller, what if we report a fire somewhere else on the farm? The fire department would come and probably all the workers would rush to help." "That's a good idea, but how do we start? A fire without causing real damage? We could make a bonfire with safe materials somewhere it won't spread. Just enough smoke to get attention." Frank nodded slowly. "It could work, but we'll need perfect timing, and you'll have to convince your mother to leave town immediately after, because Richard will know you were involved." "Fine. If we can, Save my dad and expose Richard. It's worth having to leave. Tyler, there's something you need to understand. Even if everything goes well, your father might not want to leave the warehouses right away. Why not? Because if he disappears the moment the story breaks, it might look staged. The journalist will need his testimony. Tyler hadn't thought of that. His father would have to stay in the warehouses until the authorities arrived to officially investigate. How long could that take? A few days, maybe a week. It depends on how fast the state authorities can mobilize. Tyler realized that even if everything went smoothly, there would still be a dangerous period where his father remained in Richard's hands. What if Richard figures out he's been exposed and does something to my dad? It's a risk we'll have to take. But if we do nothing, your father will end up being forced to sign the papers anyway. Tyler knew Frank was right. They were out of easy options. All right, let's do this. When does the journalist arrive? At 3 in the afternoon. We'll meet on the road leading to the farm where you talked to me last week. And the distraction? We'll create it at 2:30. That should give enough time for the workers to mobilize and leave the warehouse area unguarded. Tyler nodded, feeling a mix of nerves and determination. I need to tell my mom we'll have to leave town today. How will you explain the urgency? I'll say I found out Richard is planning something against us. It's not a lie. Frank agreed with the plan and said goodbye, promising to return at the agreed time. Tyler went inside and found his mother in the kitchen preparing lunch. Tyler, what were you talking about? You both looked very serious. Tyler took a deep breath before answering. Mom, Mr. Miller found out Richard is planning something bad against us today. He thinks we should leave town immediately. Amanda turned pale. What kind of thing? I'm not sure exactly, but Mr. Miller has contacts who know about Richard's shady dealings. He said it's too dangerous for us to stay here. Amanda sat at the kitchen table, clearly shaken by the news. My God, Tyler. I knew this would happen. Can you pack our things so we can leave this afternoon? Yes, I can. We don't have much anyway. But how will we leave? We don't have money for bus tickets. Tyler had forgotten that important detail. Mr. Miller said he can help us with that. It was a lie, but Tyler hoped to figure it out after exposing Richard. All right, Amanda said, trying to pull herself together. I'll start packing right now. Tyler helped his mother gather their most important belongings. They managed to fit everything into 2 large suitcases and a few bags. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. At 2 in the afternoon, Tyler said goodbye to his mother, telling her he was meeting Frank to finalize the travel details. Amanda was nervous but trusted Frank Miller's judgment. Tyler arrived at the meeting spot a few minutes early. Frank was already there, accompanied by a man Tyler didn't know. Tyler, this is Michael Smith, the journalist from Chicago who's going to help us. Michael was a man around 40, with dark hair and a determined expression. He carried a professional camera and a small recorder. Nice to meet you, Tyler, Michael greeted the boy. Frank told me about your father's situation. Are you sure he's being held in those warehouses? I'm sure I saw him there myself yesterday. And you're sure you can get us there without being detected? I can manage it. But we'll have to wait until the guards leave. Frank looked at his watch. It's 2:15, time to create a distraction. The 3 of them headed to a spot on the farm far from the sheds where Tyler's father was being held. Frank had brought some materials to make a fire that would produce a lot of smoke. Dry leaves, wet branches, and a bit of used oil. Let's build the fire here. Frank pointed to a spot near a dirt road where it would be easily seen. Tyler, you keep watch while Michael and I get everything ready. Tyler positioned himself behind a tree where he could watch both the road and the direction of the sheds. A few minutes later, Frank lit the fire, which quickly began to produce a thick, dark column of smoke. Now we call the fire department, Frank said, pulling out a cell phone. I'll say I spotted a fire on Richard Coleman's farm. While Frank made the call, Tyler noticed movement at the farm's main house. Several people ran out of different buildings, all heading toward the smoke. It worked, Tyler whispered to Michael. They're all coming this way. How much time do we have? Michael asked. I don't know. Once they get here and see there's no real danger, they'll go back to their posts. Then let's move, Frank said, ending the call. The fire department will be here in 15 minutes. That should give us at least half an hour before everything goes back to normal. The three quickly made their way to the sheds, careful not to be seen by the workers running in the opposite direction. When they reached the restricted area, Tyler confirmed no one was guarding it. All the guards had left to check the supposed fire. "My father is in this shed here." Tyler pointed to the second building, "and there are other people held in the first one." Michael immediately began photographing everything: the buildings, the lock marks on the doors, the modifications, made to turn the sheds into prisons. "Tyler, help me find a way inside," Michael asked. "I need to document the interior too." Tyler showed him the window he'd used to see his father. Michael managed to take several photos through the glass, including clear shots of Nathan sitting on his makeshift bed. "We need more evidence," Michael said. "Do you know where Richard keeps the documents related to this?" "Probably in his house," Frank answered. "But it'd be impossible to get in there." "What about the office near the cattle pens?" Tyler suggested. "Sometimes I've seen Richard and Carl coming out with papers." Frank nodded. "That's possible. Richard has a small office where he handles farm business." "Let's check," Michael decided. "But we have to be quick." The three headed to the office, which was about 200 yards from the sheds. The building was small and simple, with just one room and a bathroom. The door was locked, but Frank knew that part of the farm well and remembered where Richard usually hid a spare key. "Here," Frank said, pulling a key from under a rock near the entrance. Richard was always careless about these things. They entered the office, and Tyler was surprised by the number of documents and files inside. There were folders organized by year, maps of the area with various properties marked, and even some photos of people Tyler didn't recognize. Michael quickly began photographing everything, paying special attention to documents that seemed related to land purchases or property transfers. "Look at this," Michael said, pointing to a folder labeled Special Cases. "There's information here about several people, including your father, Tyler." Tyler approached and saw a file with the name Nathan Johnson, formerly Coleman, containing detailed information about his life, work, family, and even daily routines. "They've been watching us for a long time," Tyler murmured, feeling violated by the invasion of privacy. "There are files on other people too," Michael observed, flipping through the records. "At least 10 different cases in the last 5 years. Frank looked over Michael's shoulder and recognized some of the names. All these people left the area after selling their properties to Richard for dirt cheap. "Now we know why," Michael said, continuing to photograph the documents. "They were pressured the same way Tyler's father is being pressured." It was then that Tyler heard a sound that made his blood run cold. The engine of a pickup truck approaching fast. "Someone's coming," Tyler whispered urgently. Frank rushed to the window and confirmed Tyler's worst fears. "It's Carl Wilson, and he's not alone." Michael quickly put away the camera and recorder while Frank tried to return the documents to their original place. "We have to get out of here now," Frank said. But when they tried to open the door, they saw it was already too late. The pickup had stopped right in front of the office, and Carl was stepping out of the vehicle with 2 other men. "Hey, you're trapped," said a familiar voice from the back window. Tyler turned and saw Richard Coleman staring at them through the glass. The rancher wore an expression of cold fury that made Tyler feel as if the world had frozen around him. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out about your little investigation?" Richard continued, stepping into the office through a back door Tyler hadn't even noticed existed. Carl and the other men came in through the front door, effectively surrounding Tyler, Frank, and Michael. "Richard, I can explain." Frank began but was cut off. "You can explain," Richard laughed coldly. 20 years working for me, Frank, and now you betray me for some kid and a nosy reporter." Michael tried discreetly to turn on his recorder, but Carl noticed the movement and swiftly snatched the device from the reporter's hands. "Who else knows about this?" Richard asked, directing the question specifically at Michael. "No one," Michael lied. "I came on my own to follow up on some rumors." "Liar," Richard shot back. "No one comes all the way out here unless they're sure they'll find something. Someone gave you specific information." Tyler realized Richard was trying to find out if more people were involved in the investigation. The boy knew he had to protect his mother at all costs. "It was my idea," Tyler said. drawing Richard's attention to himself. "I convinced your Frank to help me." "An 11-year-old kid organized a journalistic investigation," Richard mocked. "Spare me, boy." "It's true," Tyler insisted. "I knew you had done something to my father, so I looked for people who could help me find the truth." Richard studied Tyler's face for a long moment. "You're just like your father," he finally said. "Stubborn and stupid. You think you can fight people more powerful than you and come out on top. At least we're not cowards who lock up innocent people," Tyler shot back, surprising even himself with his courage. Richard took a step toward Tyler, his expression dangerous. "Watch your mouth, kid. You're in a very delicate position to be playing the tough guy." "What are you going to do with us?" Michael asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "That depends on how cooperative you are," Richard replied. "First, I want to know exactly who else is involved in this investigation." "We already told you it's just the three of us," Frank lied. "And I don't believe that for—" "A second," Richard replied. "Carl, take them to the warehouses. We'll have a more detailed conversation there." Tyler felt panic take over. If they were taken to the warehouses, they'd be completely at Richard's mercy, and his mother was still at home, unaware anything had gone wrong. "Wait," Tyler suddenly said. "If I tell you everything you want to know, will you let Frank go? He was just trying to help me." Richard looked at Tyler with interest. "You're trying to negotiate with me, kid?" "I am. Frank doesn't deserve to get in trouble because of me." Frank tried to protest, but Tyler stopped him with a determined look. "Richard, if you let Frank go, I'll tell you who else knows about this investigation." Richard considered the offer for a moment. "Fine, but if you lie to me, Frank will suffer the consequences along with you." Tyler nodded, knowing he was risking a lot, but hoping to at least protect Frank. "The only person who knows anything is my mother, but she doesn't know details, just that I was trying to find out what happened to my dad." "Anyone else?" "No one." Richard gestured to Carl. "Let Frank go, but make it clear that if he says anything about what he saw here, his family will pay the price." Carl stepped aside to let Frank leave, but before going, the man looked at Tyler with guilt and worry. "Tyler, I'm sorry I couldn't protect you." "It's not your fault, Frank. Please look after my mom." Frank nodded and left the office, leaving Tyler and Michael alone with Richard and his men. "Now, let's head to the warehouses," Richard said. "I have some questions for the two of you, and I've got all the time in the world to get answers." Tyler and Michael were escorted to a pickup truck and taken to the area where Tyler's father was being held. The boy tried to stay calm, but he knew he was in an extremely dangerous situation. When they reached the warehouses, Richard personally opened the door to the second building where Nathan was. "Nathan, I brought you a visitor," Richard said mockingly. "Your son decided to do some private investigating into our business." Nathan paled when he saw Tyler being shoved inside. "Tyler, what are you doing here?" "Dad, I was trying to help you," Tyler answered, running to hug his father. "What a touching scene," Richard sneered. "A family reunion right in the middle of my property." Michael was taken to a different section of the warehouse, separated from Tyler and Nathan by a wooden wall. "Now let's talk about how to resolve this situation," Richard said, sitting in a chair Carl had brought over. "You've caused me a lot of trouble." "We just want our family back," Nathan said. "We've never hurt anyone." "You've hurt me," Richard shot back. "You came back to a town where you weren't welcome, and now you've brought reporters to dig into my business." "Your business is criminal," Tyler blurted out, unable to hold back. "You're kidnapping people." Richard looked at Tyler with an expression mixing anger and amusement. "Kid, you don't understand how the world works. I'm not kidnapping anyone. I'm resolving property disputes in a civilized manner." "Civilized?" Nathan exploded. "You've kept me locked up for 3 months because you refused to sign papers that would formalize something that happened years ago," Richard replied, calmly. "Our father left everything to me because he knew I was the only son capable of handling the family business." "Our father was sick and confused when he changed the will," Nathan fired back. "You took advantage of his weakness." "Prove it," Richard challenged. "Where's the proof that he wasn't in his right mind?" Nathan fell silent because they both knew it would be impossible to prove anything after so many years. "That's exactly why you're going to sign the papers," Richard continued. Because you can't legally contest the inheritance, and because I have ways to make your lives very difficult if you keep resisting." "And if we don't sign?" Tyler asked. "Then you'll stay here until you change your minds, or until I lose my patience completely." The implied threat in Richard's words sent a chill down Tyler's spine. "Richard, please," Nathan tried to reason. "Tyler's just a kid. Let him go with his mother. I'll sign whatever you want." "Now you're talking like a sensible man," Richard said. "But unfortunately, your son got himself into some very complicated things. He brought a journalist here, photographed my documents, trespassed on my property. I can't just let that slide." Tyler realized he had made everything worse by trying to help his father. Now the three of them were trapped, and his mother was still at home, unaware of anything. "What do you want from us?" Tyler asked bluntly. "First, I want your father to sign the papers renouncing any claim to the Coleman family inheritance. Second, I want the journalist to destroy all the photos and recordings he took today. Third, I want all of you to leave Boulder Creek and never come back." "And if we do all that, you'll let us go?" Nathan asked. "Eventually," Richard answered, vaguely. "Once I'm sure you've learned your lesson and won't cause any more trouble." Tyler didn't like the word eventually one bit. It sounded like Richard had no intention of letting them go anytime soon. "How long do you plan to keep us here?" Michael asked from his corner of the barn. "That depends on how cooperative you are," Richard repeated the same vague answer. "And how long it takes me to clean up the mess you've made." "What mess?" Tyler asked. "Well, for one, I need to figure out what to do with Frank Miller. He betrayed my trust after 20 years of work. And I need to make sure no one else knows about this investigation." Tyler felt like he had condemned Frank by trying to protect him. Richard clearly had no intention of letting anyone involved walk away free to tell the story. "You can't hurt Frank," Tyler protested. "He was only trying to help me." "Tyler, you still don't understand the situation you're in," Richard said with forced patience. "You're in no position to make demands or give orders." Richard stood up from his chair and motioned to Carl. "Let them think about what we've discussed. I'll be back later for their decision." After Richard and Carl left, Tyler, Nathan, and Michael were alone in the barn. The silence was broken only by the distant sounds of the farm and the noise of animals in nearby pens. "Tyler, I'm sorry I dragged you into this," Nathan said, hugging his son. "I should have signed the papers from the start." "It's not your fault, Dad. Richard's the criminal here. But now we're all in a very dangerous situation," Michael added from his corner. "And I don't know if Richard really plans to let us go after we sign." Tyler had come to the same conclusion. Richard had too much to lose if they were freed to tell the story. It was more likely he'd try to get rid of them one way or another. "We need to find a way out of here," Tyler whispered. "How?" Nathan asked. "We're locked in and there are guards watching." Tyler looked around the barn, searching for anything that could help them escape. The walls were made of thick wood, but perhaps there was a weak spot they could exploit. "Dad, when you were here alone, did you ever try to escape?" "Several times, but Carl or one of the other guards always shows up to check on things. And even if I managed to get out of the shed, I wouldn't know how to get past the farm fence without being seen." "What about the journalist? Does anyone know he came here?" "My editor knows I came to investigate a story in the area," Michael replied, "but I didn't give specific details about what I was looking for." Tyler felt his last hopes fading. Even if they escaped the shed, they'd still have to deal with the guards, the fences, and then find a way to expose Richard without putting more people in danger. "There's one thing I still don't understand," Tyler said. "Why didn't Richard just kill my dad's brothers instead of putting on this whole show?" Nathan and Michael fell silent for a moment before Nathan answered. "Because that would draw too much attention. If several brothers turned up dead in a short time, someone would eventually investigate the connection between them. The way Richard did it, each case looks isolated. And the people he keeps here, what happens to them after they sign the papers? I don't know, Tyler, and I'm afraid to find out." The rest of the afternoon passed slowly, with the three prisoners trying to come up with escape plans that inevitably hit insurmountable obstacles. Tyler was especially worried about his mother, who had probably already realized he hadn't come home. As the sun began to set, Carl returned to the shed carrying trays of simple food. "Richard sent dinner for you," he said, sliding the trays under the doors, "and he wants an answer about the papers by tomorrow morning." "What if we say no?" Tyler asked. Carl looked at the kid with an expression that mixed pity and threat. "Kid, you don't want to find out what happens if you say no." After Carl left again, Tyler tried to eat, but the food tasted like cardboard in his mouth. His mind raced, thinking of his mother alone at home, of Frank Miller who might be in danger, and the other people trapped in the first shed. "Dad, how many people did you say are in the other shed?" "Two, as far as I know. A farmer named Robert Silver and a woman named Sarah Oliver." "How long have they been here?" "Robert arrived a few weeks before me. Sarah got here about a month ago." "And have they signed the papers Richard wanted?" "Not as far as I know, but Richard is increasing the pressure on all of us." A sudden idea struck Tyler. "Dad, if all of us refuse to sign at the same time, maybe Richard won't know how to handle the situation." "What do you mean?" "If 5 people disappear at once, it'll draw more attention than if they vanish one by one. Maybe Richard won't want to take that risk." Michael brightened at the idea. Tyler might be right. If we create a big enough problem, Richard might prefer to let us go to avoid investigations. "Or he might just eliminate us all at once," Nathan said grimly. "So either way, it's better than sitting here waiting to see what he'll do to us," Tyler argued. The three spent the rest of the night planning how they could communicate with the prisoners in the other shed and coordinate a collective refusal. It wasn't a perfect plan, but it was better than surrendering without a fight. When the sun rose on Tuesday, Tyler woke to the sound of loud voices outside. Through a crack in the wall, he could see Richard talking animatedly with Carl and 2 other men he didn't recognize. "Looks like there's some commotion out there," Tyler whispered to his father. Nathan approached the wall and tried to listen to the conversation. "I can't make out what they're saying, but Richard seems worried about something." A few minutes later, the warehouse door opened, and Richard walked in with a more serious expression than Tyler had ever seen before. "You've got some very loyal friends," Richard said without preamble. "Frank Miller spent the whole night making calls to people in other cities." Tyler felt his heart race. Frank hadn't given up on them after all. "What kind of calls?" Michael asked. "Calls to journalists, lawyers, even some politicians. Seems he's decided to turn this into a personal crusade against me." "Good for him," Tyler said, unable to hide the satisfaction in his voice. "Not so good," Richard countered, "because now I'll have to speed up my plans for all of you." The implied threat made Tyler feel like he'd been punched in the gut. "What does that mean?" Nathan asked. "It means I don't have time to wait around for you to decide to cooperate. I'll give you 2 more hours to sign the documents. After that, I'll handle this situation my way." Richard stormed out of the warehouse, slamming the door behind him. Tyler, Nathan, and Michael sat in silence for several minutes, each processing the gravity of the situation. 2 hours, Michael murmured. "After that, I don't know what'll happen to us." "At least Frank hasn't given up on us," Tyler said, trying to stay optimistic. "But he may have made things worse," Nathan observed. "If Richard feels cornered, he might do something even more drastic." Tyler knew his father was probably right, but he refused to accept there was no hope left. "Dad, even if we have to sign the papers, maybe we can still find a way to expose Richard later." "How?" "If we get out of here alive, it'll be on the condition we never speak about what happened." "But the journalist already photographed evidence. If those pictures get out, Richard already confiscated the camera and recorder," Michael reminded them. "And even if I'd managed to hide some evidence, it wouldn't be enough to convince the authorities without our testimonies." Tyler realized they truly had no obvious way out, but he still refused to give up completely. "Then let's at least try the plan of refusing together. If we're going to risk it anyway, we might as well fight." Nathan looked at his son with an expression mixing pride and sadness. "You're very brave, Tyler, but sometimes courage isn't enough. At least let's try, Dad, please." Nathan sighed and nodded. "All right, we'll try. But if things get too dangerous, promise me you'll do whatever it takes to survive." "I promise." The three spent the next hour trying to find a way to communicate with the prisoners in the other warehouse. Eventually, they discovered that if they shouted loud enough, they could be heard through the walls. Tyler managed to make contact with Robert Silver, the farmer who'd been imprisoned the longest. He quickly explained the collective refusal plan and asked Robert to convince Sarah Oliver to join. "Got it," Robert shouted back. "We'll do it. We've got nothing left to lose anyway." When Richard returned 2 hours later, accompanied by Carl and 3 other men, he found 5 prisoners determined not to cooperate. "So, what's your decision?" Richard asked. "We're not signing anything," Tyler answered for everyone. "And we're not leaving Boulder Creek." Richard stayed silent for a long moment, studying the prisoners' resolute faces. "Very well," he said finally. "You've chosen the hard way." Richard gestured to his men, who immediately began opening all the warehouse section doors. "Everyone out," Carl ordered. Tyler was pushed out of the warehouse, along with the 4 other prisoners. It was the first time he had seen Robert Silver and Sarah Oliver in person. Robert was a thin 50-year-old man with a graying beard. Sarah was a middle-aged woman with dark hair and a determined expression that reminded Tyler of his own mother. "You'll get one last chance to change your minds," Richard said once everyone was gathered outside. "But this time, the offer will be different." "How so?" Sarah asked. "Only one person needs to sign the documents. The other 4 can walk free." Tyler immediately realized Richard was trying to divide the group, to turn them against each other. "We won't choose who gets sacrificed," Tyler said firmly. "How noble," Richard mocked. "But you don't have a choice. If no one volunteers, in the next 5 minutes I'll choose for you." The 5 prisoners exchanged glances, each knowing Richard would likely pick Tyler, the youngest and most vulnerable. "I'll sign," Nathan said suddenly. "Let my son and the others go." "No, Dad," Tyler protested. "We won't leave you." "Tyler, you need to take care of your mother," Nathan said, locking eyes with his son. "That's more important than any inheritance or pride." "What a touching scene," Richard remarked, "but unfortunately it won't be that simple. Even if Nathan signs the documents, the rest of you know too much about my business." Tyler's blood ran cold. Richard had just confirmed he never intended to let any of them go. "Then why make the offer?" Michael asked. "To see if any of you would be selfish enough to sacrifice the others. It's always interesting to observe human nature in extreme situations." A cold fury washed over Tyler. Richard wasn't just stealing their property and holding them captive. He was enjoying their suffering. "You're sick," Tyler said, surprising everyone with the ice in his voice. "I'm efficient," Richard corrected, "and that's why I'm ending this situation once and for all." Richard signaled to Carl, who approached carrying a can of gasoline. "What are you planning?" Sarah asked, clearly alarmed. "Solving 2 problems at once," Richard explained calmly. "Getting rid of you and destroying any evidence you were ever here." Horror struck Tyler as he realized Richard intended to burn the warehouse with them inside, passed off as a tragic accident, maybe an electrical fire. "Wait," Robert said desperately. "We'll sign the documents. All of them." "Too late," Richard replied. "You had plenty of chances to cooperate. Now I'll handle this my way." Then Tyler heard a sound he first thought was his imagination, police sirens approaching fast. Richard heard it too and tensed immediately. "Carl, go. Check what's happening." Carl sprinted toward the farm entrance as the sirens grew louder. "Seems your friends have arrived," Richard said to Tyler, but his voice lacked its earlier arrogance. Minutes later, Carl came running back. "Boss, it's the Chicago Police Department, at least 6 squad cars," Richard cursed under his breath. His expression shifted from confidence to worry, then near panic. "How did they find out?" Richard muttered. "Frank Miller," Tyler said with satisfaction. "He kept his promise." Richard glared at Tyler with pure hatred. "Even if the police are here, they'll need time to find you, and this place is huge." "Not if they know exactly where to look," Michael said. That's when Tyler had a sudden realization. Throughout the investigation, he had focused on finding physical evidence, but had forgotten something important: the people who worked on the farm. "Mr. Coleman," Tyler said, using a respectful tone that contrasted with his earlier words, "do you really believe all your employees are loyal to you?" Richard hesitated before answering. "What are you implying? How many people work on this farm? 50, 100? And how many of them know about these warehouses and the people you're keeping here?" Tyler saw a shadow of doubt cross Richard's face. "Everyone who works here owes their loyalty to me," Richard said, but his voice no longer sounded so confident. "Like Frank Miller?" Tyler asked. "He worked for you for 20 years, and yet he helped us when he learned the truth." Richard fell silent, clearly processing the implications of Tyler's words. "How many other employees do you think will choose to protect you when the police start asking questions?" Tyler pressed. "Especially when they realize they could be arrested as accomplices." It was clear Richard was beginning to panic. His carefully constructed scheme was crumbling, and he knew he couldn't control so many variables at once. "Carl, gather all the trusted men," Richard ordered. "We're leaving now." "What about the prisoners?" Carl asked. Richard glared at Tyler and the 4 other prisoners with hatred and frustration. "We don't have time to deal with them now. We'll have to leave them for later." "There won't be a later," Tyler said firmly. "The police will find everything, and you won't be able to run for long." Richard stepped toward Tyler with clenched fists, clearly tempted to strike the kid. But the sound of sirens grew louder every second, and he knew he didn't have time to indulge his anger. "This isn't over," Richard threatened, jabbing a finger at Tyler. "If I get out of here, I'll come back to finish what I started." "If you get out of here," Tyler shot back, surprising even himself with his courage. Richard and Carl sprinted toward a pickup truck parked behind the warehouses, followed by the other henchmen. Tyler could hear the engine roar to life and the tires kicking up dirt as they sped away. "They're gone," Sarah said, barely believing it. "For now," Nathan corrected. "But Tyler's right. They won't stay free for long." The 5 prisoners began walking toward the sound of the sirens, now very close. Tyler's legs trembled, not just from fear but from relief. After everything they'd endured, they were finally free. When they reached the entrance of the warehouses, they saw a scene straight out of a movie. Multiple Chicago Police Department cruisers, fire trucks, and even an ambulance. Officers were running in every direction, some setting up a perimeter, others heading straight for the warehouses. "There they are," a voice shouted. Tyler turned and saw Frank Miller running toward them, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. "Tyler, Nathan," Frank called, clearly relieved. "Are you all right?" "We're okay, Mr. Miller," Tyler replied, feeling tears of relief stream down his face. "You did it." "We all did it together," Frank corrected, pulling Tyler and Nathan into a hug. "But you were the one brave enough to start this." One of the officers approached the group. "I'm Detective Matthew Peterson with the Chicago Police Department. Frank Miller told us everything about your situation." "Where's Richard Coleman?" "He fled a few minutes ago," Michael replied. Along with some henchmen in a blue pickup truck, the detective immediately grabbed his radio and relayed the information to the other teams. "We'll set up roadblocks in the area. They won't get far." "Detective," Tyler said, "there are important documents in the office nearby. Photos of other people Richard kept captive, fake contracts, plenty of evidence." "We're already handling that," the detective replied. "We have a specialized team documenting everything." Tyler looked around and saw a full-scale police operation underway. Officers with cameras were photographing the warehouses. Others were collecting evidence. And there was even a forensic expert examining the office documents. "How did you manage to organize all this so quickly?" Tyler asked Frank. "I spent the whole night making calls," Frank explained. "I called journalists, lawyers, human rights organizations, even some politicians I knew. One person I reached was a prosecutor from Chicago who was already investigating irregularities in land purchases in the area. And they believed the story. Not at first. But when I explained all the details you'd told me, and when I mentioned there was a missing journalist, they decided to come investigate in person." Tyler felt a wave of gratitude for Frank Miller. The man had risked his own safety to save people he barely knew. "And my mother?" Tyler suddenly asked, remembering Amanda was still at home, unaware of everything. "She's on her way," Frank replied. "I called her this morning and told her what was happening. She should be here any minute." As if summoned by Frank's words, Tyler saw his mother stepping out of a police car, accompanied by a female officer. Amanda ran toward her son as if her life depended on it. "Tyler," she cried, hugging him tight enough to crack ribs. "My God, I thought I'd never see you again." "Mom, it's okay now," Tyler said, returning the embrace. "We found Dad, and Richard can't hurt us anymore." Amanda looked at Nathan, who stood a few feet away. For a moment, Tyler didn't know what to expect. His parents had spent 3 months apart under extremely traumatic circumstances. But then, Amanda let go of Tyler and walked to Nathan, stopping right in front of him. "Are you okay?" she asked simply. "I am now," Nathan replied, embracing his wife. Tyler watched his parents' reunion with a mix of relief and happiness. After everything they'd been through, his family was finally together again. Detective Matthew Peterson approached the Johnson family. "We'll need detailed statements from all of you," he said, "but that can wait until tomorrow. You've been through a traumatic experience and need time to recover." "Thank you, Detective," Nathan said. "How long have you been investigating Richard?" "Officially, about 2 months. We started getting reports of irregularities, in land purchases, fraudulent contracts, pressure on small landowners, but we didn't have enough evidence for an operation of this scale. And now you do? Now we have more than enough. The documents we found in Richard's office are enough to convict him of multiple crimes: kidnapping, extortion, forgery, running a criminal organization. He'll spend a long time in prison." Tyler felt relieved knowing Richard would finally face justice for his crimes. But there was still one worry on his mind. "Detective, what if Richard manages to escape the area?" "He won't get far," the detective answered confidently. "We've already sent his description to every police station in the state, and we're monitoring airports and bus terminals. Plus, we've frozen all the bank accounts we could identify. What about the other workers at the farm? Will they be arrested too?" "That depends on their level of involvement. Some clearly knew what was happening and will face criminal charges. Others, like Frank Miller, were just trying to survive in a difficult situation." Tyler nodded, satisfied with the answer. Frank had risked everything to help them, and it was only fair he wouldn't be punished for it. A police officer approached the group. "Detective, we found more evidence in the office. It looks like there are at least 20 cases of people being coerced into selling properties over the last 5 years." "20 cases?" Amanda asked, shocked. "At least," the officer confirmed, "and those are just the documented ones. There could be many more." Tyler felt sick thinking about how many families had been destroyed by Richard's scheme. They were lucky to have escaped with their lives. "Will we be able to recover our share of the inheritance?" Tyler asked the detective. "That's a matter for civil court," the detective replied. "But with all the evidence we have now, you have a very good chance at justice." Nathan shook his head. "I don't know if I want to go through all that legal process. I just want my family to be at peace." "Dad, but that inheritance is rightfully ours," Tyler argued. "Tyler, there are things more important than money or property. After everything we've been through, I just want to live in peace with you all." Tyler understood his father's feelings, but he still believed Richard shouldn't be rewarded by keeping stolen inheritance. "Dad, what if we recover the inheritance and use the money to help others who were hurt by Richard?" Nathan looked at his son with surprise and pride. "That's a very noble idea, Tyler, but let's first see what the courts decide, and then we'll figure out what to do." The rest of the afternoon was a whirlwind of activity. Tyler, Nathan, Amanda, Michael, and Sarah were taken to the Boulder Creek Police Station to give preliminary statements. Robert Silver went to the hospital, feeling unwell after months of confinement. During his statement, Tyler recounted the entire story, from the moment Richard showed up at his school to their rescue by the police. Reliving those moments of fear and tension was difficult, but he knew it was important to ensure Richard was properly punished. Michael also gave a statement and handed over a backup copy of the photos he had taken, stored in the cloud, which Richard hadn't known existed. The images of the documents and warehouses would be crucial evidence in the criminal case. By the time they finished at the station, it was already dusk. The Johnson family returned home accompanied by 2 officers, who would stand guard overnight to ensure their safety until Richard was captured. "I still can't believe all of this really happened," Amanda said, as she prepared a late dinner. "It feels like a nightmare." "But it's over, Mom," Tyler said. "Richard can't hurt us anymore." "I hope you're right, son. Men like him sometimes find ways to cause trouble even when they're behind bars. Nathan, who had been quiet most of the evening, finally spoke. Amanda, Tyler, I need to apologize to both of you. Why, Dad? For putting our family in danger. If I hadn't gone back to Boulder Creek, none of this would have happened. Nathan, you went back because you wanted a better life for our family, Amanda said. It wasn't your fault that Richard is a criminal, but I knew the risks. I knew Richard was dangerous, and yet I brought you all here. Tyler moved closer to his father. Dad, if we hadn't come here, other people would still be suffering because of Richard. You didn't know this would happen, but in the end, our family helped stop a criminal. Nathan looked at his son with admiration. When did you get so wise, Tyler? I think it was over these last few days. I learned that sometimes we have to fight for what's right, even when it's dangerous. The Johnson family ate dinner in relative silence, each processing the traumatic events of the past few days. But there was a sense of relief and togetherness that hadn't been there for months. Around 10 o'clock that night, the phone rang. It was Detective Matthew Peterson with news. We've captured Richard Coleman, he announced. He tried to flee to Montana but was intercepted at a police checkpoint near the border. Tyler felt as if a huge weight had been lifted from his shoulders. What about his henchman? Also arrested. Carl Wilson tried to resist but was subdued without anyone getting hurt. What happens now? Richard will be charged with multiple crimes. With the evidence we have, it's almost certain he'll be sentenced to a long prison term. After the detective hung up, Tyler finally allowed himself to relax completely. Richard was behind bars, his family was together and safe, and justice would be served. Mom, Dad, what do we do now? Tyler asked. First, we'll recover from all this, Amanda replied. Then, we'll decide whether we want to keep living in Boulder Creek or start fresh somewhere else. I'd like to stay, Tyler said, surprising his parents. We have friends here like Mr. Frank, and now that Richard is locked up, there's no reason to be afraid anymore. What about you, Nathan? Amanda asked. I think Tyler's right. Richard forced us to run once. I won't let him have that. Power over us again. Then we'll stay, Amanda decided, and we'll rebuild our lives here the right way this time. Tyler smiled, feeling hopeful about the future for the first time in months. He had lost his innocence during the ordeal, but he had gained something perhaps more valuable, the certainty that his family could overcome any challenge when they stood together. That night, Tyler slept deeply for the first time since the whole ordeal had begun. There were no nightmares of black bulls or cruel ranchers. Instead, he dreamed of a future where his family lived in peace, where justice prevailed, and where 11-year-old boys didn't have to face grown men to protect their loved ones. The next day, news of the police operation that dismantled Richard Coleman's scheme began circulating in local papers and then nationwide. Tyler woke up to find he had unwittingly become the hero of a real-life story that captured the country's attention. Reporters from various cities called for interviews. TV shows wanted to tell the tale of a boy's courage in facing a bull and a criminal to save his family. But Tyler, with the wisdom he had gained through the experience, decided he preferred a normal, quiet life. He'd had enough adventure to last a lifetime. The investigation into Richard's scheme uncovered even more crimes than initially expected. Besides extortion and kidnapping, it turned out he had forged property documents, bribed public officials, and even killed some who refused to cooperate. Richard Coleman's trial became one of the most closely followed criminal cases in the Yao state. He was sentenced to 42 years in prison for a series of crimes, including kidnapping, extortion, forming a criminal organization, and homicide. Carl Wilson and other henchmen also received long prison sentences. Several local officials, who had been bribed by Richard, were investigated and removed from their positions. The entire scheme had worked for years because Richard had built a corruption network involving everyone from local police officers to courthouse clerks and judges. The discovery of all this corruption led to a major cleanup operation in the region's judicial system. As for the Coleman family inheritance, the civil courts ruled that the will altered by Sebastian Coleman was indeed invalid, due to evidence that he had been manipulated by Richard in his final months of life. The farm and all properties were divided equally among the rightful heirs. Since two of Nathan's brothers had died without leaving descendants and the other two were never found, Nathan ended up inheriting a significant portion of the land. But true to his word, Nathan used much of the inheritance to create a fund to help the victims of Richard's scheme. Families who had lost their properties were compensated, and many who had been forced to leave the area were able to return and rebuild their lives. Tyler, now 12, went back to regular school in Boulder Creek. His classmates were initially amazed by the whole story, but over time, things returned to normal. Tyler managed to resume the life of a typical kid his age, playing soccer, studying, and occasionally getting into small mischief. But whenever someone asked about his experience, Tyler always said the same thing, that real courage wasn't the absence of fear, but doing the right thing even when you're scared. Frank Miller received compensation for losing his job on Richard's farm and used the money to buy a small property where he raised chickens and grew vegetables. He and the Johnson family became close friends, and Frank became a father figure to Tyler. Michael Smith, the journalist, wrote a series of award-winning articles about the case. He stayed in touch with the Johnson family and occasionally visited Boulder Creek to follow up on the investigations. Sarah Oliver and Robert Silver also managed to reclaim their properties through the courts. Robert returned to farming, and Sarah decided to move to the city, but before leaving, she made sure to personally thank Tyler for having the courage to unite all the prisoners against Richard. Amanda went back to work as a seamstress, but with the financial security the inheritance provided, she could now choose to work only with clients she liked, making special dresses for weddings and parties. Nathan decided to turn part of the inherited land into an agricultural cooperative, where small local farmers could grow and sell their products more easily. It was his way of honoring his father's memory, as he had always dreamed of helping the local community. 2 years after the events that changed their lives, the Johnson family gathered for Tyler's 14th birthday. It was a simple backyard party with a few school friends and neighbors. During the celebration, Tyler stepped away for a moment and watched his parents chatting with Frank Miller and other friends. There was something deeply satisfying about seeing the people he loved together in peace, without fear or worry. "What are you thinking about?" Amanda asked, walking up to her son. "Just taking all this in," Tyler replied, "thinking about how much our lives have changed, for the better, definitely for the better. We went through tough times, but in the end we grew closer." Amanda hugged her son. "You've grown so much, Tyler, not just physically, but as a person. I'm so proud of you." "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you afraid something like this might happen again?" Amanda thought for a moment before answering. "Sometimes, yes, but I've learned we can't live our lives based on fear. We have to trust that if new challenges come, we'll be ready to face them together." Tyler nodded, understanding the wisdom in his mother's words. "And you?" Amanda asked. "Are you afraid?" "Not like I used to be," Tyler answered honestly. "I think I've learned most problems have solutions if we're brave enough to ask for help and not give up. That's a very important lesson for someone your age." "It was a hard-earned lesson," Tyler remarked, "but it was worth it." As mother and son talked, Nathan approached carrying a homemade chocolate cake. "Time to sing happy birthday to the birthday boy." Everyone gathered around the table in the backyard, and Tyler blew out his 14 candles while making a silent wish that his family would stay united and happy, that the people they'd helped would find peace, and that he'd have the wisdom to use the lessons he'd learned well. After the guests left and the house grew quiet again, Tyler lay in his room and stared at the ceiling, just as he had so many times during the difficult days. But this time, instead of anxiety and fear, he felt only gratitude and hope. He had started this journey as a scared kid who just wanted to protect his father's honor. He was ending it as a young man who had learned that true courage wasn't about facing bulls or criminals. It was about never giving up on fighting for what was right. And as Tyler drifted off to sleep on the night of his 14th birthday, he knew that no matter what challenges the future might bring, he was ready to face them, with the strength of character he'd developed and the love of a family that had proven it could overcome any hardship. The story of Tyler Johnson and his family became legend in Boulder Creek, told and retold for generations, as an example of how sometimes the most unlikely people can become heroes when they find the courage to do what's right. But for Tyler, the greatest victory wasn't defeating Richard Coleman or reclaiming the family inheritance. It was discovering that even in the most desperate situations, there's always hope when people come together and fight for justice. And that was a lesson he would carry for the rest of his life. But life, as Tyler would soon learn, rarely lets people live in peace for long. 3 months after his 14th birthday, when the Johnson family had finally begun to believe all, their troubles were behind them, new challenges started to arise. It all began with a letter that arrived in the mail on a Thursday afternoon. Tyler was helping his mother hang laundry on the clothesline when the mailman delivered the official envelope, sealed and addressed specifically to Nathan Coleman Johnson. "How strange," Amanda remarked, eyeing the envelope. "Who still uses our real name?" Nathan carefully opened the letter, and Tyler saw his father's face pale as he read the contents. "What is it, Dad?" "It's from the law firm handling the inheritance," Nathan replied, his voice tense. "An unknown heir has come forward." Tyler's stomach twisted. After everything they'd been through to secure their rightful inheritance, now there were new complications. "What kind of heir?" Amanda asked. "According to the letter, it's a child of Peter Coleman, my brother who disappeared." A 22-year-old young man named Luke Coleman. Tyler vaguely remembered the story of Peter, the brother who had tried to contest the will through legal channels before mysteriously disappearing. "But wasn't Uncle Peter single?" Tyler asked. "He was, as far as I knew," Nathan replied, rereading the letter. "But apparently he had a son who was raised by his mother in another town. The boy only found out about the Coleman family after Richard's story hit the newspapers." Amanda frowned. "And how can he prove he's really Peter's son?" "The letter says he has a DNA test and documents that prove paternity. The lawyer wants to schedule a meeting to discuss dividing the inheritance." Tyler felt a mix of curiosity and apprehension. If Luke really was Peter's son, it meant he was entitled to a portion of the inheritance that currently belonged to the Johnson family. "What are we going to do, Dad?" "We'll meet this Luke and hear what he has to say," Nathan decided. "If he really is my nephew, he's entitled to Peter's share." Amanda didn't seem too pleased with her husband's answer. "Nathan, we went through so much suffering to secure this inheritance. Is it wise to give up part of it to someone who appeared out of nowhere?" "Amanda, if he's Peter's son, then he's family, and family takes care of family." Tyler, who admired his father's integrity, but also understood his mother's concerns. They had planned to use the inheritance to help other victims of Richard and to secure the family's future. Dividing it all over again would complicate those plans. The meeting was scheduled for the following Monday at the office of attorney Henry Mitchell in Chicago. Tyler asked to go with his parents, arguing that decisions about the inheritance would affect his future too. On Sunday night, Tyler barely slept. He was eager to meet this cousin he never knew existed, but also worried about the complications this discovery might bring. On Monday morning, the Johnson family made the 2-hour trip to Chicago. Henry Mitchell's office was in a modern downtown building, a far cry from the rural setting of Boulder Creek. Luke Coleman was already waiting when they arrived. He was a tall, lean young man with dark hair and eyes that strongly resembled Nathan's. He wore simple but clean clothes and had a nervous expression Tyler easily recognized. "You must be Nathan," Luke said, standing as they entered the room. "I'm Luke, Peter's son." Nathan studied the young man's face for a moment before extending his hand. "Nice to meet you, Luke. This is my wife Amanda and my son Tyler." Luke greeted everyone politely, but Tyler noticed something cautious in his manner of speaking and behavior. Henry Mitchell led the meeting, explaining the legal situation. Luke had provided solid documents proving he was Peter Coleman's son, including a birth certificate and a DNA test comparing his genetic material to hair samples Peter had left in the house where he lived. "The question now," Henry explained, "is determining how to divide the inheritance among the remaining legal heirs." "Before that," Nathan said, "I'd like to know more about Luke's story. How did you grow up not knowing about our family?" Luke took a deep breath before answering. "My mother, Catherine Roberts, met my father when she was 18. They dated for a few months, but when she got pregnant, he said he couldn't take on a child at that time. Why not? According to my mother, he was caught up in some kind of complicated legal trouble. He said it would be dangerous for her and me if we stayed close to his family. Tyler and Nathan exchanged glances. This matched what they knew about Peter trying to contest the will before disappearing. "And your mother never spoke to him again?" Amanda asked. "No. He vanished a few months after I was born. My mom tried looking for him a few times over the years, but she could never find any trace of him." "How did you find out about our family?" "When the story about Richard Coleman came out in the papers, my mom saw a photo of Nathan and noticed the resemblance to me. She told me the whole truth about my father then." Luke showed an old photo he had brought. It was a picture of Peter Coleman at 20, and the resemblance to Luke was truly striking. "And why did you decide to look for our family now?" Tyler asked directly. Luke hesitated before answering, and Tyler sensed there was something the young man wasn't telling. "Honestly, because we're going through financial trouble. My mom is sick, she needs expensive surgeries, and I can't afford them on my own." Luke's honesty impressed Tyler. Many people would have made up an emotional story about wanting to meet the family, but Luke got straight to the point. "What kind of illness does your mom have?" Amanda asked with genuine concern. "Heart problems. She needs a surgery that costs over $50,000, and Medicare has a waiting list of more than a year." Nathan looked at Amanda and Tyler before responding. "Luke, if you're really our relative, we'll help you and your mom regardless of the inheritance issue." "I'm not asking for charity," Luke replied with pride. "I just want what's rightfully mine." Tyler liked Luke's attitude. The young man had pride and didn't want to be treated like a charity case. Dr. Henry stepped in to steer the discussion back to legal matters. "Based on the documents provided, Luke is entitled to the share of the inheritance that would have gone to Peter Coleman. That amounts to roughly 20% of the total." Tyler quickly did the math in his head. 20% of the inheritance was a significant sum, but not enough to derail their plans to help Richard's victims. "I agree," Nathan said. "Luke has a right to his father's inheritance." Amanda seemed surprised by how quickly her husband made the decision. "Nathan, shouldn't we discuss this at home first?" "There's nothing to discuss, Amanda. If Luke is Peter's son, then he's family, and family has rights." Tyler noticed tension rising between his parents over the issue. Amanda clearly wasn't as convinced as Nathan that they should accept Luke so easily. "Luke," Tyler said, "can I ask you a personal question?" "Sure." "How do you support yourself and your mom right now?" "I work as a mechanic at a shop in Indianapolis. I make enough to cover basic bills, but it's not much." "And did you go to school?" "I finished high school, but I couldn't afford college. I had to work to help my mom." Tyler felt empathy for Luke. The young man had grown up in tough circumstances, never knowing his father's family, and now he was trying to save his mother's life. Dr. Henry continued explaining the legal steps needed to include Luke in the inheritance distribution. It would take a few months, but the end result would be Luke receiving Peter's share. "There's one thing that worries me," Amanda said suddenly. "How can we be sure Luke isn't being used by someone trying to take our inheritance?" Luke was clearly offended by the implication. "Mrs. Amanda, I'm nobody's puppet. I came here on my own because I found out I'm part of this family." "I didn't mean to offend," Amanda apologized. "But after everything we went through with Richard, we've become wary of people who show up out of nowhere." Tyler understood his mother's concerns, but he also felt that Luke was being sincere. There was something in the way the young man spoke that reminded him very much of his own father. "Luke," Nathan said, "while the legal paperwork is being sorted out, how about you come spend a few days with us in Boulder Creek? That way we can get to know each other better, and you can meet your family." Luke seemed genuinely touched by the invitation. "I'd really like that, Uncle Nathan. But I can't be too far from my mother. She's very frail." "Then bring her along too," Amanda suggested, surprising everyone. "Our house isn't big, but we'll make it work." Tyler was impressed by his mother's change of heart. Apparently, Luke's honesty had won even Amanda over. The meeting ended with an agreement. Luke would go to Boulder Creek the following weekend, bringing his mother to meet the family. Meanwhile, Dr. Henry would handle the legal process to include Luke in the inheritance. On the drive home, Tyler noticed his parents were quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. "What did you think of Luke?" Tyler asked, breaking the silence. "He seems like a good kid," Nathan replied. "And he's definitely family. The resemblance to Peter is undeniable." "And you, Mom?" Amanda sighed before answering. "I think he's sincere about wanting to help his mother, but I'm still worried about the implications of all this." "What kind of implications?" "Tyler, we plan to use part of the inheritance to help Richard's victims, remember? If we have to split everything with Luke, we might not have enough resources." Tyler hadn't thought of that. Dividing the inheritance would indeed complicate their family's plans to help others. "But Dad, we can't deny Luke's rights just because of our plans." "Of course not," Nathan agreed. "We'll find a way to do both. Help Luke and still carry out our plans to help the other victims. How? I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out." The following week, Tyler anxiously waited for Luke and his mother to arrive. It would be the first time he'd met relatives from his father's side of the family other than his own dad. Amanda spent the week preparing the house for their guests. She cleaned the rarely used guest room and even bought new sheets for the occasion. "Mom, are you nervous?" Tyler asked, watching all the fuss. "A little," Amanda admitted. "It's strange. Welcoming relatives we've never met before, I don't know what to expect. Luke seemed like a normal person when we met him at the office." "Yes, but meeting someone in a formal setting is different from having them stay in our home." Tyler understood his mother's worries, but he was more curious than nervous. He wanted to know more about Peter's story and how Luke had grown up without knowing his father's family. On Saturday morning, Luke arrived driving an old but well-kept car, accompanied by a frail-looking woman who was clearly his mother. Catherine Roberts was a woman in her 50s, with graying hair and a gentle smile that immediately won over the entire Johnson family. Despite her illness, she made a point of being polite and helpful. "Thank you so much for having us," Catherine said, hugging Amanda. "Luke was very emotional when he found out he had family." "I can only imagine how hard it must have been raising a child alone," Amanda replied. "You did an excellent job. Luke is a very well-mannered young man." Tyler watched the interaction between the two women and noticed they understood each other right away. There was a natural connection between them, as if they were old friends. During lunch, Catherine shared more details about her history with Peter Coleman. "I met Peter at a party in Indianapolis. He was working on a farm in the area at the time. He was a very serious young man, always concerned with matters of justice and honesty. That matches what I remember of him," Nathan confirmed. "Peter was always the most idealistic among us brothers. When he found out I was pregnant, he was happy, but at the same time, very worried. He said he was involved in a complicated legal issue with his family and that it would be dangerous for me and the baby." "Did he give any details about this legal issue?" Tyler asked. "He only said it involved a stolen inheritance and that he was trying to resolve it through the courts, but that there were powerful people trying to stop him." Nathan and Tyler exchanged glances, confirming that Peter was indeed referring to the problem with Richard and the altered will. "And after he disappeared, you never heard anything again?" Catherine shook her head sadly. "Never. For years. I hoped he would come back or at least send word, but over time I began to accept that something very bad must have happened to him." "It probably did," Nathan said grimly. "Richard wasn't the kind of man to let threats go unanswered." Luke, who had been quiet for most of the conversation, finally spoke. "All these years, I hated my father for abandoning my mother. Only now am I realizing he may have been a victim of circumstances. Your father was a good man, Luke," Nathan said. "If he didn't come back for you and your mother, it was because something stopped him. Peter would never abandon a child by choice." Tyler saw tears forming in Luke's eyes. It was clear the young man had carried hurt and resentment his whole life and was now discovering he might have judged his father unfairly. After lunch, Tyler showed Luke around the property, explaining how they had reclaimed the land after Richard's arrest. "It must have been terrifying to stand up to a man like that," Luke remarked. "It was, but in the end it was worth it. Richard is in prison, and our family got back what was rightfully ours. And now I show up to complicate things." Tyler stopped walking and looked directly at Luke. "You're not complicating anything. If you're really our cousin, then you have as much right to the inheritance as we do. But this will affect your plans to help the other victims. We'll find a way to do both. My father always says problems exist to be solved, not ignored." Luke smiled for the first time since he'd arrived. "You're a lot like your father, Tyler, and from what my mother told me, your father was a lot like mine. Then we really are all family." That afternoon, the whole family gathered in the living room to discuss plans for the future. Catherine explained in detail the heart condition she was facing and the cost of the necessary surgery. $50,000 is a lot of money, she said. But the doctor said without the surgery, I might not have more than 6 months. Amanda held Catherine's hand. "We won't let that happen. We'll find a way to get the money for your surgery." "I don't want to be a burden to you," Catherine protested. "It's already so kind of you to welcome us into your home." "Catherine, you're the mother of our nephew," Nathan said. "That makes you family too." Tyler noticed his parents had truly embraced Luke and Catherine as part of the family. There was something touching about how everyone was coming together to face the challenges ahead. "Uncle Nathan," Luke said, "how long do you think it will take for me to receive my share of the inheritance?" Dr. Henry said it could take a few months. Why? "Because my mother doesn't have a few months. She needs the surgery in the next few weeks." A heavy silence fell over the room. Everyone understood the urgency of the situation, but they also knew legal processes couldn't be rushed. "Luke," Tyler said suddenly, "what if we get a loan using the inheritance as collateral?" Nathan looked at his son with interest. "That's a good idea, Tyler. If Dr. Henry confirms Luke has a right to the inheritance, we might be able to secure a bank loan." "But what if something goes wrong with the legal process?" Amanda asked. "Who will pay the loan back?" "We will," Nathan answered without hesitation. "Luke is family. If necessary, we'll use our own share of the inheritance to guarantee the loan." Tyler felt proud of his father. Even risking his own assets, Nathan was willing to help a relative he barely knew. "I can't let you take such a risk for me," Luke protested. "It's not for you," Nathan corrected. "It's for Catherine, and it's the right thing to do." Catherine began to cry silently, clearly moved by the Johnson family's generosity. "I never imagined people could be so kind," she murmured. "We're family," Amanda said simply, "and family takes care of each other." On Monday, Nathan called Dr. Henry to explain the urgency of Catherine's medical situation. The lawyer promised to reach out to banks that offered loans against pending inheritances. While waiting for news from the lawyer, Luke decided to stay in Boulder Creek to help with the property's work. Tyler was impressed by his cousin's work ethic and mechanical skills. "You could work here with us," Tyler suggested. "We've got plenty of machines that always need maintenance." "I'd love to, cousin, but I need to go back to Indianapolis to take care of my mother." "What if you brought her here? Boulder Creek has a good hospital, and it'd be easier to care for her if we were all together." Luke considered the suggestion for a moment. Would that really be possible? "Of course. We have space on the property. We could even build a small house for you both." The idea of Luke and Catherine living permanently on the property excited the entire Johnson family. Since Nathan had returned home, the place sometimes felt too quiet and isolated. On Wednesday, Dr. Henry called with good news. He had secured a loan for $60,000, using the pending inheritance as collateral. The amount would cover Catherine's surgery and leave some for recovery expenses. "The surgery can be scheduled for next week," Dr. Henry informed them. The bank released the funds immediately. When Nathan shared the news with Luke and Catherine, they both cried with relief. Catherine hugged every member of the Johnson family, repeating thank you over and over. "Now I understand why Peter spoke so much about the importance of family," Catherine said. "You are extraordinary people." The surgery was scheduled for the following Monday at Chicago Heart Hospital. It was a complex procedure, but the doctors were confident Catherine would make a full recovery. On Sunday, before leaving for Chicago, the whole family gathered for a special lunch. Amanda had prepared Catherine's favorite dishes, and Frank Miller was also invited to join. "Frank," Nathan said during lunch, I'd like you to meet Luke, our nephew. And this is Catherine, his mother. Frank greeted the new family members with his usual warmth. It's good to see the Johnson family growing and thriving, he remarked. After all you've been through, you deserve every happiness in the world. Mr. Miller, Luke said, my uncle told me how you helped save my cousin Tyler. I'm very grateful for that. Tyler saved himself, Frank replied. I just did what any decent person would do. Still, thank you. If something had happened to Tyler, I would never have met my family. After lunch, Tyler and Luke walked around the property, talking about plans for the future. Tyler, can I tell you something I haven't told your parents? Luke asked. Of course. I didn't come looking for you just because of my mom's illness. I came because I was feeling so alone. Tyler looked at his cousin with interest. What do you mean? My mom is all I have in the world. And when I found out she was sick, I realized that if she died, I'd be completely alone. No family, no one. And now I know I have you. Even if something happens to my mom, I won't be alone. Tyler understood exactly how Luke felt. He himself had spent months thinking he'd lost his father and knew how terrifying it was to feel abandoned. Luke, no matter what happens, you'll always be part of our family. That I can promise. Thank you, cousin. That means so much to me. On Monday morning, the whole family went with Catherine to the hospital in Chicago. The surgery was scheduled for 10 o'clock, and the doctors said it would take about 4 hours. Tyler had never spent so much time in a hospital and was struck by all the movement of doctors, nurses, and patients. Entire families waited for news of loved ones, some crying with worry, others celebrating good news. It must be hard to work in a place like this, Tyler remarked to Luke as they waited in the lobby. Why? Because you see so much suffering all the time. How do doctors handle it? I think they focus on the good they can do, Luke replied. On lives they can save, families they can bring back together. Tyler considered his cousin's words and realized there were many similarities between the work of doctors and what his own family had done by exposing Richard. Both involved taking risks to help others. At 2 in the afternoon, the lead surgeon came to update the family. The surgery was a complete success, he announced, bringing tears of relief to everyone. Mrs. Catherine is in recovery and everything suggests she'll have a normal life from now on. Luke hugged the doctor, too emotional to speak. Tyler also felt an overwhelming sense of relief. He'd grown fond of Catherine during the week she'd spent at his home. When can we see her? Amanda asked. She's still under anesthesia, but in a few hours you can visit briefly. The family spent the rest of the afternoon at the hospital, waiting to see Catherine. When they were finally allowed in, they found a woman who looked much frailer than before but smiled brightly at the sight of them. How do you feel? Luke asked, holding his mother's hand. Like I've been given a new life, Catherine replied, in a weak but happy voice. And it's all thanks to your generosity. It wasn't generosity, Nathan corrected. It was family taking care of family. Catherine stayed in the hospital for a week to recover. The Johnson family took turns keeping her company, and Tyler used these visits to get to know both Catherine and Luke better. He discovered that Luke was a lot like his own father, honest, hard-working, and with a strong sense of justice. Catherine, in turn, reminded him of Amanda in her determination and strength of character. You know, Tyler said to Luke during one visit, I think our dads would have gotten along really well if they'd met. Your dad and my dad. Yeah. They seem to share the same values, the same concerns about justice and family. Luke grew thoughtful for a moment. Sometimes I wonder what it would have been like if my dad hadn't disappeared. If I had grown up knowing you, knowing my father's family. It would have been different, Tyler agreed, but maybe not better. You and your mother became very strong people by facing hardships alone. If life had been easy for you, maybe you wouldn't be the people you are today. That's an interesting way to look at it. My father always says we shouldn't dwell on the past, but use our experiences to build a better future. When Catherine was finally discharged from the hospital, she was fully recovered and excited about the future. The doctors said that with proper care, she could live normally for many years. Now I need to find a way to repay all the help you've given me, Catherine said during the trip back to Boulder Creek. "You don't have to repay anything," Amanda replied. "We just want you to be happy and healthy. Even so, I want to do something useful. I've been thinking, what if I helped you with the project to support the other victims of Richard?" Nathan glanced at Catherine through the rearview mirror. "What kind of help did you have in mind?" "Well, I worked as a secretary for many years before I got sick. I know how to organize documents, make contacts, that sort of thing. I could help manage the Victim Assistance Fund." Tyler thought the idea was excellent. They really needed someone to handle the administrative side of the project, and Catherine had experience in that area. "That's a great idea," Tyler said. "And this way you and Luke could stay here in Boulder Creek, close to family." Luke also seemed excited about the possibility. "Mom, are you sure you want to do this?" "Yes, son. All these years, I've had to face hardships alone. Now I want to use that experience to help others going through the same thing." The conversation about the future continued throughout the trip back. By the time they arrived in Boulder Creek, they had already decided that Luke and Catherine would move permanently to the Johnson family property. In the weeks that followed, the property became a hub of activity. Nathan and Luke worked together to build a small but comfortable house for Catherine, while Tyler helped Amanda organize the space for the Assistance Fund's office. Frank Miller also got involved in the project, offering his knowledge about the local families who had been harmed by Richard. "There are still many people suffering from what that man did," Frank explained during a meeting at the Johnsons' house. "Families who lost their land, people who had to leave the area, businesses that were ruined." "How many families do you think were affected?" Catherine asked, already stepping into her role as project organizer. "Directly, at least 20. Indirectly, probably many more." Tyler was stunned by the extent of the damage Richard had caused. It was hard to imagine one man could bring so much suffering. "And how will we identify these people?" Tyler asked. "I can help with that," Frank replied. "I've known this area a long time. I know which families were hurt." Over the following weeks, Frank and Catherine worked together to compile a complete list of Richard's victims. Some still lived in the area, others had moved to distant towns, and a few were hard to track down. Each case was unique, but all involved some kind of loss. Land sold under threat for low prices, businesses sabotaged, families forced to leave. "There's one family here that particularly saddens me," Frank remarked, pointing to a name on the list. "The Olivers. They owned a bakery in town, a business that had been in their family for 3 generations. "What happened to them?" Tyler asked. "Richard wanted to buy the land where the bakery stood to build a gas station. When they refused to sell, he started spreading rumors that the bakery sold expired products. And people believed it? Unfortunately, yes. In no time, customers stopped going to the bakery. The family was forced to close the business and sell the land for a fraction of its real value." "Where are they now?" "They moved to Washington. The father found a job at a factory, but they never fully recovered." Tyler felt anger hearing stories like this. Richard hadn't just stolen money or property, he had destroyed dreams, family, traditions, a lifetime of honest work. "Let's reach out to them," Tyler decided. "Maybe we can help them start over." Catherine wrote down the name of the Oliver family on a special list of priority cases. She had proven to be a natural organizer, creating efficient systems to catalog information and track the progress of each case. "Tyler," Catherine said, "you have a real knack for this. Have you ever thought about studying law when you're older?" "Never considered it. Why?" "Because you have a natural instinct for justice, and you know how to organize information to solve problems. Those are important qualities for a lawyer." Tyler pondered Catherine's suggestion. Truthfully, the whole experience with Richard had sparked an interest in justice and people's rights. "Maybe I'll think about it when it's time to choose a career." "It'd be great to have a lawyer in the family," Luke remarked. "Then we could help even more people." The idea of becoming a lawyer began to take root in Tyler's mind. He imagined using legal knowledge to protect families like his own, to stop people like Richard from causing so much suffering. 2 months. After Catherine recovered from surgery, Dr. Henry finally completed all the legal steps to include Luke in the inheritance. The young man officially received his share, which was immediately used to pay off the loan that had funded his mother's surgery. Now we're official owners, Luke said, examining the documents that proved his stake in the land. It feels strange. Why strange? Tyler asked. Because my mother and I never had anything of our own our whole lives. We always lived in rented homes, always depended on jobs that could end any time. And now? Now I have security. I know my mother will never go without, and I have a family that supports me. Tyler understood how Luke felt. He himself had spent months thinking his family might lose everything because of Richard. Having security was truly a precious feeling. With Luke's legal situation resolved, the family could finally focus entirely on their project to help Richard's other victims. The first case they decided to tackle was the Oliver family, the former bakery owners who had been forced to move to Washington. Catherine managed to find their current address through a network of contacts she'd built over the years. Nathan decided to make the trip to Washington to speak with them in person. "I want to come too, Dad," Tyler requested. "Tyler, it's a long trip and you have school." "Dad, please. It was through my investigation that we uncovered all these crimes. I want to help fix the consequences too." Nathan looked at Amanda, who nodded in agreement. "All right, but just this once, I don't want you missing too much school." The drive to Washington took 4 hours. Along the way, Nathan and Tyler discussed the best way to approach the Oliver family. "We have to be careful not to come across as offering charity," Nathan observed. "Proud people like them might take offense. How should we present our offer then? We'll explain that we're trying to right past wrongs and that they're entitled to compensation for the harm they suffered." When they arrived at the address Catherine had found, they came upon a small apartment in a modest building on the outskirts of Washington. It was a stark contrast to the house the family had lived in back in Boulder Creek. Mr. Robert Silver answered the door and was immediately wary at the sight of 2 strangers. "Good morning, Mr. Robert. My name is Nathan Johnson, and this is my son Tyler. We've come from Boulder Creek to speak with you about Richard Coleman." Robert's expression shifted instantly at the mention of Richard's name. "Richard Coleman? What do you want to know about him?" "We'd like to discuss the harm he caused you and your family. May we come in?" Robert hesitated for a moment, but then opened the door and invited them inside. The apartment was tidy, but clearly much smaller than the space the family had been accustomed to. "My wife, Mrs. Mary," Robert introduced a middle-aged woman who stepped out of the kitchen upon hearing unfamiliar voices. "Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Mary. As I was telling your husband, we're here to talk about Richard Coleman and the troubles he brought upon you." "Why would you care about that?" Mary asked, still suspicious. Nathan briefly recounted his own family's story, explaining how they had uncovered and exposed Richard's criminal scheme. "So you're the family that managed to put that bastard behind bars?" Robert asked, his voice a mix of admiration and relief. "That was us, yes," Tyler replied. "And now we're trying to help all the families he hurt." Mary began to cry quietly. "You have no idea what that man did to our family. He destroyed a business that had been in our family for 3 generations, our reputation, our entire lives." "Tell us what happened," Nathan urged gently. Robert and Mary recounted in detail how Richard had systematically ruined the bakery's reputation, spreading lies about the quality of their products and even bribing some customers to file false complaints. "Within 6 months, we lost 90% of our customers," Robert explained. "We couldn't even pay our employees. We were forced to sell everything to Richard for a pitiful sum." "And how was starting over here in Washington?" Tyler asked. "Extremely difficult," Mary answered. "Robert got a job at a factory and I work as a cleaner. We earn far less than we did with the bakery, and we've never recovered financially." "What about your children?" "We had to pull our daughter out of college because we couldn't afford tuition anymore. She works as a store clerk now, but she always dreamed of being a teacher." Tyler's heart ached hearing their story. Richard hadn't just stolen money or property, he had destroyed dreams and opportunities for an entire family. "Mr. Robert," "Mrs. Mary," Nathan said, "we're here to offer a way to make things right, at least in part, for what Richard did to you." "How so?" Robert asked. "We've recovered some of the inheritance Richard stole, and we've decided to use that money to compensate the families he harmed." Robert and Mary exchanged glances, clearly struggling to believe what they were hearing. "You're offering us money?" Mary asked. We're not offering, Tyler corrected. You're entitled to this. Richard destroyed your business unlawfully. This is compensation, not charity. How much are we talking about? Robert asked, hesitantly. Enough for you to start over, Nathan answered. To return to Boulder Creek and reopen the bakery if you want, or to stay here and begin a new business. Robert began to cry, covering his face with his hands. I can't believe this is happening. All these years, I dreamed of the day I could prove Richard was a criminal. Now he's in prison, Tyler said, and people know the truth about what he did. Could our daughter go back to college? Mary asked, hope in her voice. Of course, Nathan replied. You can use the money however you think is best. The conversation continued for another 2 hours, with Robert and Mary sharing details about their years of hardship and making plans for the future. When Nathan and Tyler finally said goodbye, they left a check that would allow the family to restart their lives with dignity. Thank you, Robert said, shaking Nathan and Tyler's hands. You've given us back our hope. On the drive back to Boulder Creek, Tyler stayed quiet for a long time, thinking about everything he had seen and heard. What's on your mind? Nathan asked. I'm thinking about how many other families like the Olivers are out there, people who were hurt by Richard and never managed to recover. That's why our work matters, Tyler. We can't undo everything Richard did, but we can try to help people rebuild their lives. Dad, do you think we'll be able to help all the families who were harmed? I don't know, but we'll try to help as many as we can. And even if we don't help everyone, every family we do help makes a difference. Tyler nodded, understanding the wisdom in his father's words. They couldn't solve all the world's problems, but that didn't mean they shouldn't try to fix what was within their power. When they returned home, they found Amanda, Luke, and Catherine gathered in the kitchen, sorting through papers and discussing other cases of families in need of help. How was the trip? Amanda asked. It went well, Tyler replied. The Oliver family was very grateful. I think they'll be able to rebuild their lives. That's good, Catherine said, because we've identified 3 more urgent cases while you were gone. Tyler looked at the stack of papers on the table and realized there was much work ahead. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, he felt motivated. Each document represented a family they could help, an injustice they could set right. Where do we start? Tyler asked, sitting at the table and picking up one of the files. Here, Luke answered, showing him a document. We have the case of a family who lost their cattle ranch 3 years ago. Richard forced them to sell their land after poisoning their livestock. Tyler quickly read the file, feeling the familiar anger rise in his chest. Richard truly had been a monster, causing unnecessary suffering to innocent people. Let's help them too, Tyler said firmly, and everyone else we can find. Amanda looked at her son with pride. You've grown so much, Tyler, not just physically, but as a person. I'm so proud of the man you're becoming. Tyler smiled at his mother, but his mind was already focused on the next case they needed to resolve. He had discovered a calling to help people, and he intended to keep doing it for the rest of his life. In the months that followed, the Johnson-Coleman family, as they had informally begun calling themselves, helped more than 15 families recover from the damage Richard had caused. Some returned to Boulder Creek, others used the compensation to start fresh elsewhere, but all regained their dignity and hope. The work wasn't easy. Each case required investigation, documentation, and often complicated negotiations, but the satisfaction of seeing families reuniting, businesses reopening, and children returning to school made all the effort worthwhile. Tyler, now 15, had become an expert at organizing information and identifying the specific needs of each family. His personal experience with the trauma caused by Richard helped him understand and connect with the other victims. Tyler, Catherine said one Friday afternoon as they organized the office files, have you thought about what you want to study after high school? Yes, I have. I think I want to study law, like you suggested a few months ago. That's a good choice. You have a natural talent for it. And after I graduate, I want to come back here and keep helping people. Maybe open a practice that offers free legal services for those who can't afford it. Catherine smiled, clearly proud of Tyler's determination. Your father would be so proud to hear that. Do you really think he would? I'm sure of it. Nathan has always cared about justice and helping others. Seeing that you've inherited those qualities would be the greatest pride of his life. Tyler felt a wave of satisfaction hearing that. His whole life, he'd strived to be worthy of his parents' pride, and knowing he was on the right path was deeply rewarding. That evening at dinner, Tyler officially announced his decision to study law. It's a tough profession, Nathan remarked. But if that's what you want, we'll support you completely. I've already started researching universities, Tyler said. There are some good options in Chicago, so I can keep living close to you. Don't worry about that, Luke said. If you want to study at a university farther away, we'll figure out a way for you to go. Tyler was moved by his family's support. Ever since Luke and Catherine had joined them, the sense of family unity had grown even stronger. There's one thing I want to do before starting college, Tyler announced. What is it? Amanda asked. I want to visit Richard in prison. The silence that followed was heavy and uncomfortable. Everyone at the table stared at Tyler with expressions of surprise and concern. Why do you want to do that? Nathan asked. Because I want him to know about all the families we've helped. I want him to understand that his crimes had consequences, but they didn't break people's spirits. Tyler, this could be very upsetting for you, Amanda cautioned. Richard is a dangerous man, even behind bars. Mom, I'm not afraid of him anymore. And I think I need to do this to finally close that chapter of my life. Nathan considered his son's request for a moment. If you really want to do this, I'll go with you. Thank you, Dad. The visit was scheduled for 2 weeks later at a state prison about 3 hours from Boulder Creek. Tyler spent that time mentally preparing himself to face the man who had traumatized his family. On the day of the visit, Tyler woke up feeling nervous but determined. He'd spent the previous night writing a list of all the families they'd helped to show Richard the positive impact their work was having. The prison was a grim and intimidating place with high walls, barbed wire, and armed guards at every entrance. Tyler shuddered, imagining what it must be like to live in that environment every day. Richard Coleman looked nothing like the powerful, arrogant man Tyler remembered. 2 years in prison had left visible marks. He was thinner, with completely grey hair and a tired expression that hadn't been there before. Well, look who came to visit me, Richard said, when Tyler and Nathan sat across from him at the visitation table. The brave kid and his heroic father. We're not here to argue, Tyler said calmly. I came to tell you a few things. Tell me what? How you're spending my money? It's not your money, Nathan corrected. It never was. And Tyler wants to tell you how we're using our family's rightful inheritance. Tyler pulled out the list he had prepared and began reading the names of the families they had helped, explaining how each had recovered from the trauma Richard caused. The Oliver family reopened their bakery in Boulder Creek, and now they're thriving again. Their daughter went back to college and will graduate as a teacher next year. At first, Richard tried to keep an indifferent expression, but Tyler noticed the information was affecting him. The Smith family got their cattle ranch back and now has one of the most productive herds in the region. Tyler continued down the list, detailing how each family had rebuilt their lives. With every name, he saw Richard's expression darken. Why are you telling me this? Richard asked when Tyler finished. So you understand you didn't succeed in destroying these people. They're stronger than you thought. And so you know the harm you did has been undone, Nathan added. The families you hurt have recovered, and Boulder Creek is a better town without you. Richard fell silent for a long moment, clearly processing everything. You think this makes any difference? He finally said. I still ruined dozens of lives. I still caused suffering that lasted years. It does make a difference, Tyler replied, because it proves good always wins over evil in the end. What childish philosophy, Richard mocked, though his voice lacked its former cruelty. Maybe it is childish, Tyler admitted. But it's true, you spent years building a scheme of evil, and in just a few months we undid most of the harm you caused. Richard looked at Tyler with an expression mixing anger, respect, and something that might have been regret. You've become a man, kid. When I first met you, you were just a scared little boy. Now I see you've grown into someone I could never be. What do you mean? Someone who uses power to help others instead of hurting them. Tyler hadn't expected such a profound remark from Richard. There's still time for you to change. Too, he said. Even here in prison, you can find ways to do good. Richard laughed bitterly. Tyler, I'm 62 with a 42-year sentence. My time for doing good is long gone. It's never too late to try to be a better person. For me, it is, but you have your whole life ahead of you to keep doing the good you're doing. The visit lasted only an hour, but it was deeply meaningful for Tyler. Seeing Richard in his current state, defeated and isolated, helped him understand that revenge had never been the goal. The goal had always been justice and the chance to help others. On the drive home, Tyler stayed quiet for a long time, processing the conversation. What did you think of his reaction? Nathan asked. I think he got the message. And in a strange way, I think he was even proud to see how I've grown. Proud? Yeah. Like in some twisted way, he contributed to making me the person I am today. Nathan considered his son's observation. Maybe it really did contribute. Sometimes people learn more from their enemies than from their friends. How so? Richard showed you exactly the kind of person you don't want to be, and by fighting against him, you discovered the kind of person you want to become. Tyler realized there was wisdom in that remark. Truly, his experience with Richard had shaped many of his values and life goals. Dad, do you think I'll be able to help a lot of people when I graduate from law school? I'm sure you will, Tyler. You're already helping, even without formal training. I can only imagine what you'll achieve once you have the technical knowledge to match your determination. This conversation marked the end of a chapter in Tyler's life. He had faced his greatest fear, confronted the man who had caused so much suffering to his family, and emerged from the experience stronger and more determined than ever. In the years that followed, Tyler graduated from law school with honors, specializing in human rights and social justice, and returned to Boulder Creek to open the pro bono law firm he had dreamed of since he was a teenager. Luke became his partner, not as a lawyer, but as an administrator and investigator. Catherine continued organizing cases and coordinating support for victims of injustice. The family farm became a resource center for those who needed legal help but couldn't afford it. There were meeting rooms, an extensive case archive, and even temporary housing for families who traveled from other towns seeking assistance. Nathan and Amanda, now in their 50s, took on roles as advisors and mentors, using their life experience to guide other families facing hardships. Frank Miller, now retired, became an informal ambassador for the project, traveling the region to identify cases of injustice and connect victims with Tyler's firm. 10 years after Richard's arrest, Tyler had helped over 200 families resolve legal issues and recover from injustices. Some cases involved land disputes, others labor issues, and some even domestic violence and discrimination. Did you know you've become a legend around here? Luke remarked one afternoon as they reviewed pending cases. How so? People talk about the kid who stood up to a bull and a criminal to save his family, then grew up to become a lawyer who helps anyone in need. Tyler laughed at the description. Sounds like a movie plot when you put it that way. Maybe because it really is an extraordinary story. How many 25-year-olds can say they've changed the lives of hundreds of families? Tyler looked around the office he had built, at the photos of all the families they'd helped over the years. Each picture represented a small but meaningful victory against injustice. You know the best part of all this work? Tyler asked. What? Every family we help becomes stronger and able to help others. It's like a chain reaction of kindness. How so? The Oliver family, for example. After they rebuilt their bakery, they started hiring young people from the community who were struggling. And many of those they helped became positive examples for other families. Luke nodded, understanding Tyler's point. It's true. The good we do multiplies just like the harm did when Richard was free. That evening, Tyler had dinner with his extended family, his parents, Luke, Catherine, and Frank Miller, who had practically become an adoptive grandfather. Frank, Tyler, said during dessert, "Do you ever regret getting involved in our story back at the beginning?" Frank looked at Tyler with a surprised expression. Regret it? Tyler, getting involved with you all was the best decision I ever made in my life. Why? Because it taught me it's never too late to do the right thing. I was 50 when I decided to help you, and I thought my life was already set, but I discovered I could still make a real difference in the world. And what do you love most about the work we do? Frank thought for a moment before answering. I love seeing families reunited. I love seeing kids going back to school. I love seeing people regain hope. Tyler smiled, knowing exactly what Frank meant. Those were the same things that motivated him to keep going. There's something I've always wanted to ask you, Tyler, Catherine said. Don't you ever feel angry about the time you lost fighting Richard? Don't you wonder how different your teenage years could have been if none of that had happened? Tyler considered the question carefully before answering. Sometimes I do think about it, but then I remember all the good that came from that experience. I met you and Luke. I found my calling. I learned values that will guide me for the rest of my life. And you never doubt if you chose the right path? Never. Every family we help confirms I'm in the right place, doing the right work. The conversation continued late into the night, with each member of the family sharing memories and reflections on the journey they'd taken together. When Tyler finally went to sleep, he looked out his bedroom window toward the fields where it had all begun. Where the warehouses once stood, where Richard had kept his prisoners, there was now a small memorial to the victims of injustice, with plaques bearing the names of all those harmed by the criminal scheme. It was a constant reminder that evil had real consequences in people's lives, but also that those consequences could be overcome when good people came together to fight for what was right. Tyler fell asleep that night knowing he had found his purpose in life. It wasn't just about being a successful lawyer or making a lot of money. It was about using his talents and resources to make the world a fairer place, one family at a time. And as he slept, Tyler no longer dreamed of black bulls and mysterious farms, but of a future where justice prevailed, where families lived in peace, and where children could grow up without fear of men like Richard Coleman. It was a dream he was determined to make real, no matter how much time or effort it took. The end. Now tell us what you thought of the story and where you're watching from. If you have anything to share with us, leave your honest thoughts in the comments. Do you think Tyler made the right choices standing up to Richard? We'd love to hear your opinion. Thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other exciting stories